Hello, your channel Eugene Light Novels greets you. I hope you are enjoying these beautiful novels. Now, let's continue with the novel, I Am a Pirate, Born into the Strongest Family. First part. Chapter 1, What Should I Do If I Am Threatened by the System? Haiyuan Calendar Year 1503. East China Sea, Windmill Village. The waves are hitting the rocks. Today's style is extremely big. It seems that the weather is about to change. Two figures, one large and one small, faced each other on the rocks. The eldest figure is 36 years old, wearing a dark green coat, with a serious face, black hair scattered casually on the back of his head, and a square tattoo on the left side of his face. The youngest one is only 15 years old, with a handsome face but still masculine. His eyes are like a deep lake, crystal clear, shining with the light of wisdom. He holds a little baby about 3 months old in his arms. I disagree. Talaj spoke out angrily, but was afraid of disturbing his eldest nephew in his arms, so he tried to keep his voice low. 5 years ago, when you were just promoted to lieutenant general, you said you wanted to go out and have a look. The old man reluctantly agreed. Today you sneaked back with a little baby and told me that you wanted to quit Marine? What happened to you in the past few years? What's wrong with Marine? The old man is already very old, and he can't stand your torment. Talaj asked angrily, feeling very dissatisfied with this brother who had disappeared for several years. He jumped up and punched the tattoo on his left cheek hard. Dolag staggered after being beaten. He rubbed the painful left side of his face, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and smiled happily. I haven't seen you for many years. It seems that you have grown a lot. Dolag didn't answer the question, his eyes were a little blurry, as if he was nostalgic, but also seemed to be feeling emotional. Don't talk about useless things. Answer me. What happened? Talaj's eyes were blood red, he clenched his fists, and he secretly felt hatred in his heart. After years of training, a full blow was still painless in front of this man. Drag slowly stepped forward and rubbed his brother's hair, but Drag threw him away angrily. He sighed helplessly and said dully, Marine? I couldn't see the justice I wanted, so I was so angry that I went to sea to relax. My heart and my actions are as clear as a clear mirror, and everything I do is righteous. It's not what you saw. It's just what. Talaj interrupted the eldest brother's memory in front of him. He had already understood his eldest brother's point of view, but he did not agree with it. The old man is about to turn 60, how many more years can he live? Doesn't eldest brother know anything about his expectations for us? Dorag was stunned by his brother's words and was speechless for a long time. He slowly turned around and faced the sea, a drop of water slipped from the corner of his eye. As strong as he was, there were things he had to give up. Family affection? Friendship? Standing? Or faith? Dolag flew into the air and landed on a small boat under the reef. The voice is a little hoarse. The child in your arms is my son, your eldest nephew, named Monkey D. Luffy. Forget me, just pretend that I have never been this person. I have things I must do. He will take my place and make up for the filial piety I failed to fulfill. Give him to the old man, he will understand. Dorag gritted his teeth and said the last sentence, and only he knew the pain in his heart. This time he sneaked back, but he didn't dare to meet his father. He understood how much harm what he was doing would cause to the old man. Brother! Talaj let out a cry of pain and fell to his knees, with snot and tears streaming down his face involuntarily. Luffy, who was sleeping soundly, was awakened by this loud shout. At such a young age, he showed something different from ordinary people. He didn't cry or fuss. Instead, he was grinning with his little teeth bared, and his little hands were waving hard, as if he was trying to wipe away the tears on Talag's face. Dolag, who turned around, was shaken by the big brother's voice. Enduring the sadness and pain deep in my throat, I managed to laugh out loud. Ha ha ha, brother, let the wind of fate blow freely. In the future, we will meet again. I believe that day will not be too long. As soon as he finished speaking, the sky suddenly changed, the wind roared, the rising fog blocked this large area of the sea, and his figure gradually disappeared here. Is this still the case? I can't change anything. Tyurage slowly stood up, watched his eldest brother leave, and whispered what he had just understood. He was born into this world 15 years ago. In his previous life, he was an orphan and a patient with myasthenia gravis. The new volunteer nurse misused the medicine for treating Alzheimer's disease on him, causing him to fall asleep. When he woke up again, he ushered in his new life, a brand new world, a young body, and an unprecedented family relationship. In his previous life, he was paralyzed in bed and had no other hobbies. Even if he had, his body would not allow it, so he had to pray to the dean to put in more anime discs. One Piece is his favorite one and he has watched it over and over again. For him who has lived on a small bed all his life, those so-called righteousness, good and evil, standing, everything is not important. As long as his family is well, he should never be separated. He likes how furious Garp is when educating his grandson. I like how Whitebeard risked his life to save his son. Zoro shouted to heaven for his dead friend. What Tetsuo said, don't catch a cold, Sanji. Nami's favorite orange. Cherry blossoms blooming in winter. The sea train that can't stop. Binxa's wine that never ends. The broken sailboat traveled across the ocean to take them home. I traveled to thousands of hospitals just to save your white sorrow. For the sake of Bo's wife, Senior wears baby clothes all his life. He likes everything that exists here, family affection, friendship, love. He had nothing before. I cherish everything I have now. Dad Garp, eldest brother Dorag, sister Makino, eldest sister Dayton, the village elder and uncle, including all the villagers in the village. The only regret is that I never met my mother who died in childbirth. Bite. Feeling that the host's mood fluctuates greatly, the emotional system has been bound, and the novice gift pack has been distributed. Please pay attention to the host to check it. Tyurage wiped the corners of his eyes and reached out to tease Luffy in his arms. He didn't take the notification sound in his mind seriously at all. Cherishing what he has now is what he wants to do most right now. System? Get out of here. Perhaps because he felt Tyurage's contempt, he was very unhappy with the system that only appeared after 15 years of travel. Detection host lacks self-motivation, system tasks have been issued, please check carefully. Little Luffy, I'll find you some milk when I get back. Don't worry. Tyurage continued to hold Luffy in his arms and walked towards home. The mission? He didn't even look at it. Mission failed, Garp's lifespan will be reduced by 10 years. My day. Chapter 2. Carrying this surname, even a dog must learn to be domineering. Tailage's house, which he and his eldest brother built together many years ago, is located on the west side of Windmill Village. It is very close to the jungle and Mount Kolbo. It is a wooden house built entirely of wood. It has 3 bedrooms, 1 living room, 1 kitchen and 1 bathroom, which can accommodate their family of 3. But he never thought that his eldest brother and his father were away at sea all year round on missions, leaving him alone in this huge wooden house. Woo, wow, wow. Little Luffy, who was only about 3 months old, cried out perhaps because he was hungry. Tyurage opened the door and placed Luffy on the bed, while he rummaged around hurriedly. After a long time, Tailage wiped the dust from his face and said to himself, dumbfounded. It's useless. I remember that the milk powder the old man bought for me 14 years ago was kept here. Where did it go? Glancing at Luffy who was crying more and more, Tyurage gritted his teeth, pulled out a short blade from his trouser leg, and slowly approached Luffy. Whoa! The shining blade made Luffy stop crying, put his little hand in his mouth and nod, his big eyes blinking. Although I'm sorry, brother, there's nothing I can do about it. Tailage himself still owes Sister Maginot 10,000 Baileys, and his pocket is cleaner than his face. Where can he get milk powder for him? The scene turned, and Tyurage was squatting by the river, carefully washing his bloody hands. It was so cruel that tears flowed down from the corners of my mouth uncontrollably. Tailage picked up the rabbit meat that he had just killed next to him, picked up a bundle of firewood, and ran home. After being out for half an hour, I don't know how little Luffy was crying at home alone. Maginot's home is not far from Tailach's home, and it is also the only way for him to go back. Brother Tai Lag. Are you going hunting again? Makino came out to dry the clothes, and caught a glimpse of his hurried figure from the corner of her eye. The corners of her mouth raised slightly involuntarily. He put his hands to his mouth, making a loudspeaker gesture, and shouted softly. Don't run away. When will you return those 10,000 Baileys to me? I'll pay you back next time. Goodbye. Talag will not stop, 10,000 belly? Do you think my waist is worth the money? Humph, it's true. If you see me, run away and I'll never bring you another drink. Maginot pinched her slender waist and stamped her feet angrily. Although she said so, she would still secretly put a bottle of good wine at the door of his house every morning. Tailach stopped, took a deep breath, patted his chest and muttered helplessly to himself. Sister Maginot is getting more and more fierce. Dad, can you leave some of your salary for me? My son is so poor that he can't afford to eat. My mind is full of questions. Dad Garp is Marine's lieutenant general and Marine's hero. His salary is too much to spend. But I never thought that this old man didn't think about his family at all. Apart from keeping the money for himself to buy Senbei donuts. All the rest was used as pensions and distributed to the soldiers who died under their command. So, host considers whether it is good to do the task. Money? Strength? Resources? What is needed? The humble voice of the system echoed in his mind again. When he met the stubborn host for the first time, he was helpless. After Tailach put the firewood in the kitchen, he quickly walked back to the bedroom and took out a freshly made rattle from his pocket. Place it next to Luffy, who fell asleep again due to hunger. After doing all this, he wiped the sweat from his face, curled his lips and muttered. Mission? How can I have time to do it? I still have to cook for my eldest nephew. With the unremitting efforts of the host, you will catch a rabbit, make a rattle, and be rewarded with a ton of Dolly brand Thrive milk powder. Please pay attention to check it. Tailach called him a good guy. Has he humbled himself to this extent? He shook his head, took out a can of milk powder from the system space, opened it, picked up a small handful and put it into his mouth. 99%. With our family's physical fitness, if the milk powder is dry, it should be fine, right? Tailach had never taken care of children, and he didn't know how to prepare milk powder, so he simply prepared it in a 1-to-1 ratio. 1 spoonful of milk powder and 1 spoonful of warm water. Add more water to the powder and more powder to the water. After a while, you will have brewed a large pot. This pot must weigh at least 10 kilograms, right? Throwing the bottomed milk powder can on the ground, Tailach happily hugged little Luffy on the bed. Little Luffy, it's time to take a bath. No, it's time to eat. Woo, wow. Little Luffy was woken up by him, and as soon as he opened his eyes, he grabbed the milk basin on the table that was bigger than him. Ha ha ha. Don't worry, I'll feed it to you now. Tailach kissed little Luffy and put him into the milk basin. Gulu gulu. In less than a second, little Luffy sank. Tailach looked at the bubbles coming out of the milk basin and secretly sighed at the strength of the family's physique. Such a small one has such a good appetite. Huh? Why is there no movement? He hurriedly inserted his hand into the basin and grabbed the little Luffy, who was almost drowned. He put his finger on Luffy's nose and probed, and found that he was still breathing, so he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He shook his head with a wry smile and said to himself, "It seems that we should ask Sister Maginot to help take care of her tomorrow. There are still 3 days until Dad's next vacation, which is almost here." Tailach recalled that he was just an old man who pooped and pooped. He must be very experienced in raising children. If we don't count the fact that we feed him meat when he is 1 year old and feed him wine with chopsticks when he is 2 years old. After checking over and over again many times, I was sure that Luffy had fallen asleep after eating enough and was not unconscious due to choking on the milk. Only then was he completely relieved. He hugged little Luffy, placed him on the bed, and wrapped him in a quilt. System, view panel. Tyurage has watched a lot of anime and is not very unfamiliar with the system. Now that he has some free time, let's take a look. The system has no human emotions and no soul of its own. Otherwise, he would definitely cry bitterly. He was finally taken seriously. Name, Monkey D. Teleg. Age, 15 years old. Fruit, none. Armed color domineering. Hardening, only increases defense, no obvious characteristics. Wrap domineering energy around various parts of the body. Wisdom and domineering. Sense breath, enhance your own perception, detect changes in the breath of surrounding creatures, and read the location, number, and strength of surrounding creatures. Sense attack, perceive the opponent's next move and react in advance. Conqueror's Haki, unawakened. Skills learned. Marine 6 style shave, step on dozens of times at high speed in an instant, generating explosive reaction force to move at high speed. Marine 6 style paper painting, release the strength of the whole body, and through the changes in airflow caused by the opponent's movements, the body becomes as thin as paper, and the body can be controlled easily and dodge attacks directed at oneself. The magical props actually reflected all the indicators of my body in the form of words. Teleg stroked his chin with one hand and commented arbitrarily on the data panel displayed by the system. Props. As for the practice of domineering, Teleg has been following Garp and practicing under his guidance since he could walk. Explain all kinds of theoretical knowledge from the beginning, pass. To polish the body, such as throwing into cliffs, mountains, jungles, oceans, swamps, glaciers. Later, when used in actual combat, he was beaten unilaterally by Garp. Tyurage squatted on the ground and covered his head in pain. These not-so-good memories reminded him of his unhappy childhood. If it weren't for the kind-hearted Sister Maginot, every time he was injured, they would comfort him considerately and bandage him carefully. Maybe during a certain exercise, I was either depressed or depressed. The old man once said. Dominance is a potential power that everyone possesses, but most people are unaware of its existence. Even if you work hard for it all your life, you won't be able to use this kind of power. Except for the monkey family. With this surname, even if you are a dog, you still have to develop domineering for Lousy. He only learned the first stage of domineering entanglement, entangling various parts of the body. As for wrapping the domineering energy around an object, we haven't mastered it yet. Forget it, this prop is just like that. Apart from the panel you can look at, it is useless. Tyurage waved his hand and scattered the panel in front of him. He picked up the mandatory exercise device Garp had prepared for him and prepared to go out. It was time to practice. Chapter 3 Progressive Overload. The 6 forms of Marine are the result of the joint creation and continuous optimization of Marine's physical arts masters over the generations. The latecomer, Garp, not only practiced the 6 Marine styles to perfection, but also made further improvements on them. How could he not teach his son this method of training his own physical skills? Tyurage touched his aching head and grinned to himself. There are still 3 days until Dad comes back. It is impossible to master moonwalk initially. It seems that this iron fist of love is inevitable. Glancing at little Luffy on the bed, Tyurage opened the door with a 3-ton exercise machine on his back. But the steps he was about to take stopped in mid-air, and a drop of cold sweat streaked across Tyurage's cheeks. His throat moved slightly, he swallowed, twitched the corner of his mouth, and said with a difficult smile. Ha ha ha. Ma, Sister Maginot, why are you here? Outside the door, it was Maginot who had been chasing him all the way. I saw her arms folded across her chest, holding a clothes rack in her arms, pouting her lips, and tiptoeing on the ground with her exquisite little feet. What? I can't come. Are you chasing me away? Maginot was obviously a little unhappy. It was because this guy ran so fast that she thought something had happened, so she followed him all the way. How is it possible? It's too late for me to like you. How can I chase you away? Tyurage immediately shook his head in denial, otherwise this girl would really be angry. In his previous life, he was paralyzed in bed and did not have a clear understanding of what he said. He didn't notice Maginot in front of him at all. Because of his polite words of liking, his slightly red cheeks revealed an inexplicable shyness. Who made you like it? Maginot walked up quickly, stamped him hard, and then ran away laughing happily. Remember to come to my house for dinner tonight. I will cook a big meal for you. Why is it so inexplicable? Tyrage stared at the girl running away, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and smiled faintly. Let's go. Let's have a big dinner tonight. Ha ha ha. He didn't know what this feeling in his heart was, but if he really wanted to say it, it might be happiness. Trust, companionship, care, tolerance. He had it all. Today's training goal is to run 30 laps around the entire windmill village with weights. He doesn't know what shortcuts are, and his father has never told him that there are shortcuts to improving strength. Only innate talent and unremitting efforts will create a strong person. Yesterday I ran 29 laps and fainted in front of my house. Today I will break through this limit no matter what. Tyrage stared ahead, displaying his strength and speed wantonly, with a very clear goal. That is to break through your own limits. His father told him that the improvement of strength is to constantly break through one's own limits. Increase the weight of the exercise machine, increase the total number of training sessions, change the difficulty of the movements, and adjust the training cycle. These are progressive overload. Proper use of these can promote muscle growth and improve physical fitness. But don't increase training too much at one time, otherwise it will not be exercise, but chronic suicide. There are no benefits, but it will cause irreversible damage to the body. Lap 25. Tyrage ran with all his strength, his clothes soaked with sweat. His breathing gradually became rapid, but his eyes were full of determination. His steps were fairly steady and he continued to trot forward at a steady pace. Lap 29. At this time, his legs felt as heavy as lead, every step became extremely difficult, and his eyes gradually became double. Can't give up. Tyrage bit the tip of his tongue sharply, and the pain prompted him to wake up again. Now that I have completed yesterday's exercise, I can't afford to fall down here. Now he can no longer be said to be running. If he were not still standing. Even if he could crawl again, it would still be possible. Every time he took a step, his body would inevitably sway, as if a gust of wind could blow him over. Ah! Brother Tyrage. You exercised too much. My mouth, the corners of my mouth are bleeding. Tyrage followed suit and walked to the door of Maginot's house. Makino, who had already prepared dinner, was sitting alone at the door of her house. He held his chin with both hands, smiling happily, looking forward to the arrival of his sweetheart. But I never thought that it would only be 4 hours before and after meeting again, but it would feel like a lifetime ago. Maginot had already become accustomed to her brother's injuries as a common occurrence. But today, it was the first time she had seen him in such a state that he could faint at any time. He shouted in shock and rushed to Tyrage's side. The little hand wanted to hold him up, but Tyrage, who was speechless, stopped him with his eyes. Tyrage bit his bloody tongue again and smiled bitterly to himself. Hey, dear, with a 3-ton load, if I fall down, will Sister Maginot be crushed into a meat pie? Less than a kilometer away from his home, Maginot followed him worriedly, her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't understand why her brother tortured her like this when Uncle Garp was away. Is strength so important? Finally. The home appeared in Tyrage's sight. Now, let alone biting his tongue, he didn't even have the strength to open his teeth. Nowadays, it is all thanks to his unyielding spirit that supports him in moving forward. Every time you take a step, you will inevitably stop and rest for more than 10 seconds before taking another difficult step. Elder brother. Maginot covered her mouth in pain, and big tears kept flowing down. Boom. Ah. Here we are. Amid Machino's cries, Tyrage's body fell heavily at the door of his house. I used my last strength to throw down the weight on my back, and could no longer open my eyes. But the corner of his mouth always evoked a faint smile, and he succeeded. At this time, the sun had already set in the west, and a beautiful sunset appeared on the horizon. Tyrage knew that he was taking another step towards becoming a strong man. Brother? You're awake. Tyrage slowly opened his eyes, looked around, and finally fixed his gaze on Maginot, who was holding little Luffy. He smiled bitterly and said with a hoarse voice. Worrying you, Maginot. Maginot pouted, but tears streaked down her cheeks again, and she carefully put down Luffy. He threw himself directly on the bed, grabbed Talag's neck, and shook him back and forth. You still say? Why do you treat yourself so badly? Is strength so important? Woo-woo. Tears fell on Tyrage's face and slowly slid into his mouth. The bitter and salty taste, but he felt a different kind of sweetness. This feeling is so comfortable. Talage couldn't help but laugh out loud, but it angered the little pepper on his body. You're still laughing. Why didn't I run away to kill you? Maginot raised his right hand and punched him hard in the face. Tyrage acted like a normal person. He didn't even blink, the corners of his mouth were raised, and there was always a smile in his eyes. Ah! It hurt so much. Instead, Maginot let out a cry of pain and blew herself, her fists turning red due to excessive exertion. Ha ha ha. Come again, I'm not afraid of your brother. Her appearance made Talag laugh. With this strength, she was even less powerful than her father. Chapter 4. A ruler is short, an inch is long. Maginot gritted his teeth, feeling secretly resentful in his heart. Brother Talag is still like this. He doesn't understand anything and only laughs. Finally. Amid Tyrage's ridicule, Maginot could no longer hold back her irritable temper. Lying on his shoulder, showing his sharp teeth, he bit down. Ah, it hurts. This was really painful, and Talag didn't dare to use hardening to resist, for fear of hurting her. So this bite from Maginot really hurt him. Humph, look, how dare you laugh at me, Luo Luo Luo. Maginot sat up straight and stuck out her tongue playfully, very satisfied with the teeth marks she left. No. Not again. Tyrage endured the pain in his body and slowly sat up from the bed. He pretended to be in unbearable pain, which made Makino's heart skip a beat. Like a child who made a mistake, he put his little hands in front of his body and his beautiful eyelashes drooped. With an obvious cry, he lowered his head and whispered softly. Did I hurt you by biting you? I'm sorry. This girl shed a lot of tears for him today. It was absolutely impossible for Tyrage to continue teasing her, so he quickly comforted her. No, I just exercised too much and my body is a little sore. After sitting up, Talage realized that his clothes seemed to have been changed. By the way, the distance from the door to the bed is quite large. It was a big embarrassment for the petite Maginot to be able to move him, who was quite heavy, onto the bed. When Maginot heard this, a smile appeared on her face again. After raising his head, he found that Talag had been looking down at his clothes. Her expression suddenly changed, like a boiling boiler, as if steam was coming out. He jumped out of bed in a panic, picked up Luffy in a hurry, and ran out of the bedroom. I'm going to warm up the milk for the baby. Maginot in the living room covered her blushing face with one hand, thinking wildly. It's just a change of clothes. Brother, you won't think too much about it, right? Recalling the fool-like laughter of Talag in the past, Maginot sighed like a little adult. She was overthinking. By the way, whose child is this? Maginot held little Luffy in one hand and handled the milk basin on the table that had turned into cheese with the other hand. It was obviously inedible. He's my eldest brother's child, his name is Luffy. Talag, who walked out of the bedroom, heard her muttering and answered aloud. Brother Long's child? Is he back? Maginot's eyes lit up. In her impression, Dorag was a gentle, careful and considerate big brother, completely different from the careless Talag. How many times have I told you that you should call him uncle and call me daddy and grandpa? I just came back and left, leaving my eldest nephew in my care. Tyrage covered his face, completely confused by the fact that Maginot was only 13 years old. Why do we have to call the 36-year-old Dolag the eldest brother and the 59-year-old father the uncle? I want you to take care of it. Maginot suddenly raised her voice and roared angrily, but accidentally woke up the sleeping little Luffy in her arms. Whoa! The little guy woke up, his evil little hands seemed to be grabbing something. Maginot's face turned red, she took Luffy's little hand, rolled her eyes at Tarrag next to her, and asked aloud. Where is the milk powder? Luffy is hungry, I will make some milk for him. I'll get it for you. Talage smiled slightly, he had to find professional people for professional matters, so he didn't have to worry about it this time. Quickly returned to the bedroom, took out more than 10 cans of milk powder from the system space and put them in the cabinet, so that when needed in the future, there would be no need to hide it from others. Here, is 1 can of milk powder enough? Talage didn't keep her waiting for long, and soon came back with a can of milk powder. Do you think the little guy can eat like you? Every time Maginot talked to him, she felt like she was being d off, and she stamped him hard. He glanced at the large bowl of cheese on the table and muttered disdainfully. The craftsmanship is so poor. Without me, you would have been malnourished. Talage was despised, and he had no place to reason, because everything Maginot said was right. If it weren't for the fact that he could go to Maginot's house every now and then to improve the food and grill the meat himself every day, he might have gone completely stupid. In view of host completing the exercise task independently, the reward, a reward of an eternal milk bottle? Talage was not interested in the system that came out to create a sense of presence, but he also hid in the blind spot of Maginot's perspective and took out the milk bottle. I dug it out in the cabinet and gave it to him to use. Tarrag handed the bottle to Maginot, who was worried that he didn't have the milk-making equipment. If you have this, wouldn't you take it out earlier? After being glared at again, Talage felt so miserable that he couldn't express his feelings, so he could only curse angrily in his heart. Why the hell couldn't you take it out earlier? It's useless. I don't know where the young Maginot learned the craft. The brewing ratio is precise 1:7, and the water temperature is exactly controlled at around 40 degrees Celsius. You can tell by looking at Luffy's increasingly bright eyes that it's not an ordinary drink. What are you looking at? You won't learn from it. Taking care of children is a delicate job. Being criticized again, Tarrag had the idea of doing a system task for the first time. What tasks does the world's top chef need? This needs to be done step by step, and it is divided into several. Don't clean up those useless things. I'll clean the house. Can you give it to me? There are difficulties. Have any difficulties? Then you have to overcome them. That's it. Talage nodded to Maginot, picked up the broom and started cleaning, his eyes filled with light for the first time. No one would have thought that the reason a time traveler with a system, wanted to do a mission for the first time was because he was despised for making milk powder and was forced to come up with it. Hey! Are you okay? The house is full of dust. What should I do if the child chokes? Maginot sniffed her nose, turned her head angrily, snatched the rag and broom from Tarrag's hand, and pointed at the door. Get out of here, don't come in without my permission. Tyra lowered her head and felt for the first time that she was a waste and was despised again. Life is hard and bitter, but I am happy. The back of gate of opening was a little lonely as he left. Tarrag sat on the stone at the door, looked up at the sky, and sighed again and again. How about host overcome it? You can get the reward right away. Roll. Time flies by, and in just 10 minutes, Talage recalled his blank life. It seems that apart from polishing his body and exercising his strength, he really doesn't know how to do anything. He can't even do a simple cleaning of the room. Alas! It's difficult. Squeak. Maginot pushed open the door. Luffy had already fallen asleep. This child was really good at eating. He drank more than 10 bottles of milk before he was full. You are still sighing, these things are not something you men can do well in the first place. Maginot bent down, her big eyes blinking at Tarrag's face, a smile on her brows. I just feel like I'm such a waste, I can't even do the most common cleaning. Tarrag felt that he had lived so many years in vain. In all his past and present lives, he was almost 40. In the end, he was useless. Who said that? Maginot stood up and shouted angrily. Then she felt that she was a little too excited, licked her lips, smiled sheepishly and said, People are good at different things. A ruler is short and an inch is strong. Brother, don't deny yourself. You are already very good. For example, I can only do housework, make delicious food, brew delicious wine, and have excellent etiquette. Tirage stared at him dumbfounded, praising Maginot who couldn't stop praising him. He shook his head with a wry smile and said, Ahem. Are you here to attack me, or are you here to attack me? Chapter 5 Garp returns. 3 days later. Pang! The door of the house was pushed open by Maginot, and the figure hurried in. At this time, Tirage was taking a nap with Luffy in his arms. After hearing the sound, he wiped the corners of his eyes, sat up, took a deep breath and said, What's wrong? Maginot is frizzy. This impetuous little girl has no clue that she will turn into a kind and gentle character when she grows up. Makino rolled her eyes and said breathlessly, Ka, Uncle Garp is back. 3 question marks appeared on Tirage's head. He turned his head with a stiff neck and looked at the calendar with circles on the side. Holy shit. Hide the wine bottles in the house for me. He picked up Luffy next to him, pushed open the window, and with a few steps, he disappeared from Maginot's sight. Makino opened her mouth in shock. Your father is back, what are you afraid of? Hey! Why are you holding Luffy? Maginot shouted into the distance, but received no response. He shook his head and obediently packed up the wine bottles in the room. Little Luffy, it's up to you whether you can avoid this beating. Tirage, who indirectly used Shaolin, looked at the little Luffy in his arms and realized that moonwalk still hadn't been learned yet. You ask me why I am afraid? I have an iron fist like a sandbag and understand. Soon, Tirage carried Luffy to the dock. At this time, the place was already surrounded by villagers, and they all came out to greet Garp. As a marine hero and the patron saint of Windmill Village, Garp is respected by the villagers. Teleg, this way. The village chief Schlapp waved his hand and laughed to greet Tirage who came over. Uncle Schlapp, you are here too. Tirage walked forward with Luffy in his arms and smiled. That be ********** D is back. I must come out and take a look. I don't know how many pirates he has captured this time. The village chief, Schlapp, touched the hat on his head and looked towards the dog-headed warship that was about to enter the harbor. The stability of the East China Sea, which is known as the weakest sea area, is all due to Garp, the marine hero who is stationed here. Tirage curled his lips, lowered his head to tease Luffy who had just woken up, and said casually. TCH, I'm obviously just worried, so there's nothing wrong with me. What did you say? The village chief tapped his cane hard, stared at his big bloodshot eyes, and turned his head to look at Teleg. Am I right? Tirage didn't tolerate him, so he fought back. That's right. 2 figures, an old man and a young man, stared at each other behind the crowd, neither of them convinced of the other. The 2 were so angry at each other that they didn't notice the noise coming from the crowd in front of them. Mr. Garp, welcome back. Mr. Garp, this cruise has been fruitful again. By the way, haven't the warships entered the port yet? Why did Mr. Garp come back first? The villagers lined the streets to welcome him, but Garp sneaked off the boat and returned first. Garp has a broad chest and strong muscles. He has a scar on his left eye. His eyes are blue and his head is covered with short black hair. Wearing gray striped casual clothes, with a Justice marine cloak hanging behind him. Ha ha ha. In 2 months, I visited the East China Sea again and basically eliminated all pirates, big and small. Garp responded to the villagers' enthusiasm by laughing, saying he was still comfortable in his hometown. As for why he came ashore first, it was of course because he missed his dear son. Garp was tall, looked around the crowd, and picked his nose unhappily. He politely bent down and asked a young villager. Why didn't my son come to pick me up? There is no one in this village who doesn't know Teleg, so Garp can find out just by asking around. In the back, I saw him just now, thank you Mr. Garp for your hard work. Asked the villager. Kaido was excited. Okay, thank you. Garp's clenched fists had veins popping out, and he looked gloomily across the crowd, his unhappy mood clearly written on his face. In order to see you as soon as possible, I flew over before the boat even docked, but you hid behind and didn't come out to meet you. I'm so angry. Seeing this, the villagers shook their heads helplessly and moved out of the way. Their little Tylag was going to be beaten again. This scenario happens almost every time Garp returns. He could always find something wrong with Talag so that he could wield the iron fist of love. Regarding this matter, Tyrage, who was still quarreling at the rear, had no idea. I didn't. Who would worry about that? B*********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** I said yes. Otherwise, why are you in such a hurry? Tyrage pretended to be disdainful and continued to mock the old man. You. Schlapp was so angry that he was about to curse, but was interrupted by a strong figure walking towards him. A gloating smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. You're a little kid, you're fighting with me, you were beaten 13 times because your dad was late, and you have no memory at all, ha ha ha. Garp walked towards him with a gloomy look on his face, and Tyrage shivered. He was so absorbed in the noise just now that he forgot the purpose of coming here. Sorry, I couldn't pick you up in time. Tyrage bent down to apologize very skillfully. This scene made Schlapp, who was watching on the sidelines, want to laugh out loud. Is that all? B*********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** used the Sick-style shaver, waving his fist and hitting it on the head. Due to the angle, he didn't see Luffy in Talag's arms. Pung! Ah, it hurts. Old guy, I've already apologized, what else do you want? Garp took a step forward and stretched out his fist, his furious eyes turned white, and he roared. Don't you feel a pity? B******************* D. I'm your father you've reunited with after a long absence. Tirage squatted on the ground, rubbed the big bump on his head with one hand, and roared. So what? I just keep getting beaten. Even so, I still want my son's love, Baga. How dare you call me old guy? I'm your dad. The furious Garp jumped up and aimed at his dear son with a fist filled with all his love. Of course, Talag would not be so stupid as to squat there and get beaten. In an instant, he raised the little Luffy in his arms high above his head and shouted quickly. Do you want to punch your grandson to death? Well? Garp, who was 3 meters above the ground, was frightened by his son's shout and the child raised above his head. His body was instantly deflated and he fell heavily to the ground. Lying on the ground, he raised his head in disbelief and said with difficulty. I've been away from home for more than 2 months. Do you have a son? Maginot? Well? This time, it was Tirage's turn to be shocked. He looked down at his father lying on the ground in stunned silence. What kind of talk is this? What do you call his child? Or Maginot's? Ahem. Schlapp couldn't stand the interaction between father and son anymore. In public, it was unbecoming for the dignified marine hero to fight with his son, which tarnished the image of their windmill village. I had not seen any passion for 2 months, and was completely extinguished by these weird men. I sighed helplessly and said. You two go home and talk. We all know the soldiers under your command. Just leave them to us to take care of them. Garp on the ground, tears of regret flowed from his eyes. He also felt that the family scandal should not be exposed to the public. He patted the ground, stood up straight, took Luffy gently with one hand, and held him gently in his arms. One hand was filled with armed domineering force, and he violently pinched the back of Tirage's neck. He lifted his entire body off the ground without giving Tirage a chance to explain. Then I'll trouble the village chief. I'll give you an explanation on this matter. Garp seemed to think that this was Tirage's son, and couldn't stop crying. Makino is only 13 years old, who gave birth to such a beast like you. Father. Crack. The sound of the neck being pinched. Go home first, beat you up, and then propose marriage. The good mood of coming back to see his son was completely gone. With a short and powerful voice, he took his children and grandchildren moonwalk up into the air and went straight to the house. Chapter 6. I sat up in shock when I was dying. The clown was actually me. Garp was very fast. He arrived at the door of his house in a short while and threw the talag in his hand to the ground. "Gate your father the gate of opening," shouted angrily. "Little grandson, show me to grandpa," a voice full of doting. Talag put one hand on the back of his neck and used force to straighten the dislocated bones. I didn't dare to say it to my face, so I cursed secretly in my heart. "Old guy, your grandson is your biological child, am I not?" The door was opened, and Maginot was holding a rag and carefully wiping the table in the living room. "Get out!" Garp scolded angrily, kicked Talag away from the door, walked to Maginot's side, and said with a serious face. "I'm very sorry, Maginot. My son did something wrong. It's because I, the father, didn't discipline him well. I'll tie him up in a moment. You can kill him or chop him into pieces. I will never stop him." Garp clenched his fists in embarrassment and said angrily. "If you really can't do it, you can just hand it over to me." Uncle Garp, what are you talking about?" Maginot was startled by the sudden appearance of Garp in front of her, and she rubbed the back of her head in confusion. But then he saw little Luffy in Garp's arms, chuckled, and said shyly. "Uncle Garp, you don't think Luffy is the child of me and my brother Talag and me?" Maginot looked a little shy under Garp's fiery eyes, with her hands behind her back and her little feet drawing circles on the ground. "Is it Luffy? What a good name." Garp's mind seemed to have completely filtered out everything Maginot said, and only remembered Luffy's name. He raised his head and said sincerely. "When I give this B************* DA lesson, let him marry you with generous gifts. Don't let outsiders laugh at you." What are you talking about?" Maginot finally couldn't bear the sudden happiness. With steam coming out of his forehead and his face flushed with shame, he pushed Tairage aside with all his strength, turned around and ran out. Maginot left, and the room became silent again. The two of them sat at the table, silent for a long time. Alas! This is the dragon's child. For a long time, tears streaked down Garp's face unconsciously. Tairage didn't speak, but nodded lonely. After the play was over, when he was at the dock, he didn't react to his father's words at first. But then he figured it all out, he just felt a little sorry for Sister Maginot. "When did he come back and what did he say?" Garp asked. 3 days ago, he said to Marine that he couldn't see the justice he wanted, and he also said to let the wind of fate blow freely." Tairage repeated his elder brother's words verbatim, including sending Luffy back to fulfill his filial piety. Garp burst into tears. They have been together for more than 30 years. How could he not understand his eldest son's thoughts? He has always been opposed to the O'Hara Buster Call incident 3 years ago. He knew that that incident would completely turn his son on the opposite side of the world. Government? Marine? You have given yourself a powerful enemy. I hope everything goes as you wish. Garp hugged Luffy, looked up at the roof, and asked lightly. "Let's go with me." Tairage looked stunned and asked. "Where to go?" "Marine, I want you to become an excellent Marine." Garp suddenly raised his voice and looked at his second son with burning eyes. The eldest son long embarked on a road with no return, and he did not allow his second son to do the same. Not for the time being, Luffy still needs someone to take care of him. He is the heir of eldest brother. Tairage shook his head and refused with a serious expression. Nothing is more important than his family. Garp clenched his fists, sighed, and loosened his fists weakly. "I'm not kidding, I'm talking about letting you marry Maginot. Luffy's life experience needs to be concealed. This is the only thing he can do as a dragon." Before Talag could reply, Garp said decisively. "Luffy needs an identity. He can't be the son of a dragon. Do you understand? Before he grows up, no one can know his life experience." Tairage looked at Luffy in his father's arms with confusion, but still shook his head decisively and said. "There are other ways to cover up one's life experience. I don't agree with what you said." Garp slammed the table, his eyes widened like bells, and he was about to explode. Although Tyridge was afraid of his father, he would not agree to anything like this and would just slap the table. Shouted angrily in a voice louder than Garp. Don't be so silly with me. First, Maginot is my sister and that's all. Second, this method will hurt her too much. How can you let her have the face to see others? The father and son just stood in front of the dining table and were in a stalemate. No one could convince the other. The room became silent again until it was broken by Luffy's cry. Garp slapped himself hard, sat down, and said regretfully, I was wrong. Underneath his careless appearance, Garp has a clear sense of right and wrong. He knows that his son is right about this matter. What are you doing? Tyridge stretched out his hand slightly distressed, wanting to touch his father's face. Just say what you say, and correct it if you make a mistake. Why are you hitting yourself? Garp laughed out loud and cried. Ha ha ha. As expected of my son. He hammered the table and said with a serious look. I will stay in Windmill Village until Luffy can become independent. As long as I am here, no one will investigate, and no one will dare to investigate the affairs of Windmill Village. A moment of domineering power frightened Tyridge across from him. He didn't expect that he could only hit his own father, but he had such courage. What did Marine say? Garp picked his nose with a look of disdain. I'm sick and need to take 6 or 7 years off. Don't come to me if you have nothing to do, and don't come to me if you have something to do. Tailage had a dark look on his face and said speechlessly. Are you sure that the Warring States General won't come over in a warship? Garp laughed and said. Ha ha ha, so I will give him an explanation. What explanation? Garp did not speak, but looked at his second son with a look of dismay on his face. Tyridge pointed at himself in confusion, and sat up in shock while dying of illness. The clown is actually me? Go ahead and take me to apologize to that girl. It's me, Meng Lang. Garp picked up the milk bottle on the side, laughed and left, taking care of the children. He was so good at it. When he gets older, he will have new toys to play with. Think about it. Well, let's tie up the balloon first and let him fly into the sky for fun. Tyridge covered his face. At the end of the day, he still wanted to be a Marine. I hope this old man didn't just find a reason to take a vacation. After all, when there was no Luffy, he would come back every few days. Tarrag gate of opening left, Garp held an empty milk bottle and looked at the direction he left in silence. Dorag. Chapter 7 Blackhair turns white overnight. It's late at night. Makino, old, Dad is joking, don't take it seriously, he is just a B******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** away from his hometown. Talij, who has been living here since birth, is very reluctant to leave. After arriving at Maginot's house, he first apologized for his father, and then saw that Maginot had cooked the meal, so he stayed. After drinking half a barrel of cherry blossom wine made from Maginot, I lay on the table drunkenly, not knowing what to say. He has been talking for more than 3 hours, and Maginot has always lowered his head, sitting next to him, silently listening to him. Talij fell asleep, and Maginot put an arm around his shoulders, lifted him to the bed with great effort, and took off his clothes. She was lying next to him fully clothed, her beautiful eyes were very close to his face, and she whispered softly, "Brother, you are a man of great ability. If you want to be a sailor, I support you from the bottom of my heart. Every season from now on, I will brew a barrel of cherry blossom wine that is unique to you, waiting for you to come back, come back." She didn't say the word, "marry me," until the end. Many years later, things have changed, and I don't know if my brother will still remember him. In Donghai Windmill Village, there is always a little girl who makes wine for you. Maginot slowly closed her eyes, and a drop of crystal slowly crossed her cheek. She is immature and doesn't understand at all. For the monkey family, taking a vacation is a simple matter. The next day, Talij opened his eyes with a splitting headache, looked around, and found that this place was not his home. Hiss! I have a terrible headache. I will never drink so much again. It's all because of the cherry blossom wine made by Sister Maginot. It's so delicious. He complained softly, but he was overheard by Maginot, who walked over quietly with honey water in hand. Hey! Then this person who blames me, does he still want to drink the honey water? Maginot held the honey water and pretended to pour it away, with a slight smile on her lips. Don't pour it. Drink, drink, I'll drink. He jumped out of bed, took the honey water from Makino's hand, and drank it in one gulp. Ha ha ha, it's better to be my sister. Tyrage wiped his mouth, then put on his clothes and said with a smile. I really bothered you last night. I had to go back and see my dad. I don't know if the old man got irritable again because I didn't go back all night. Maginot placed the tea tray with her hands on her lower abdomen and said with a smile. Then go back first. By the way, don't you have anything to say to me? Her brother was going to be a Marine. He had inadvertently revealed it when he was drunk. Now she wanted to hear him say it herself to confirm it. Thank you. Talag was startled by the question, scratched his head and made a confused sound. Get lost. Maginot stepped on him and ran out angrily. You be ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** Baffling. Talij looked at Maginot running away, but instead of chasing him, he returned home alone. After all, this girl has a changeable temper. He really can't figure out whether she is really angry or fake. No, she never seems to be really angry. Let's try to calm her down later. The distance was very close, and soon Tylag returned home, only to find that the door of the house was locked from the inside. Boom. Hey, Dad. It's not that serious. It's just that I didn't come home for one night. Talij knocked on the door fiercely several times. He didn't even know that the door at home could be locked. What could this old man do? In the room, Garp, who had not slept all night, raised his head and looked in the direction of the knock on the door. He picked up a mirror on the table and looked at it, shaking his head with a wry smile. He spoke in a hoarse voice. Don't come in. Go to Bogart and ask him to take you to the recruit camp to report. Boom. Talij knocked on the door again. What happened? After not seeing him for one night, he was not allowed to enter the house. Fortunately, the door at home is made of wood, so let's tear it down. Pung. With a kick, sawdust and smoke flew everywhere. Talij coughed and walked in angrily. When he saw his father clearly, who was haggard after a sleepless night, Tyrij's eyes were dull. The old man sitting cross-legged on the bed hugging Luffy, his short black hair had turned into silver. Talij's lips trembled slightly and he managed to murmur. "Fa, what happened?" Garp grinned and said. "Ha ha ha. I won't let you in, but you still want to come in. It's not a big deal." "Daddy!" Talij screamed in extreme grief and knelt down in front of Garp. It's really hard to understand how rough and difficult his father's mental journey was that night. The green hair on his head has turned white. This old man, who seems to have aged 20 years in an instant, is his father. Dorag. Tyrag gritted his teeth, kowtowed to Garp 3 times, then got up and ran straight to the marine campsite. He wants to go to the headquarters, he wants to practice his skills systematically, he wants to have strong strength. He wants to find his eldest brother Dorag, drag him to his father and kowtow. Let him open his eyes and take a good look. It was his bullshit revolution that made their father torture like this. Is someone calling me? Humble system, online social fear. Marine campsite. Located in an open area near Party's bar. At this time, Bogart was training this batch of recruits who had just been assigned to Lieutenant General Garp. 1. Ha. 2. Ha. Tyrij stood not far behind Bogart, in the blind spot of his sight, secretly observing all this. I saw that the swords in the hands of the soldiers were slashing uniformly, and a murderous aura rushed towards their faces. Bogart, who had his back turned to him, moved his eyes slightly and raised a smile at the corner of his mouth. I saw him slowly pulling out his sword and saying to the soldiers, "You haven't mastered the essence of swords yet. I'll give you a demonstration. Watch it carefully and learn from it." Lime. The blade was instantly unsheathed, and a slash like a blue dragon flying into the air went straight to Talig, who was hiding behind. Holy shit! Lao Im Bai! Tyrage cursed angrily. He thought he was hiding well, but he didn't know that others had discovered him long ago. Armed and entangled. Tyrage's two forearms instantly became extremely dark, and a rich armament-colored domineering energy gathered on them. Facing the oncoming huge slash, Tyrage did not hide. Instead, he raised an evil smile at the corner of his mouth, crossed his arms, and planned to attack forcefully. I have always heard from my father how powerful Bogart is. Today, let him try out his skills for himself. Chong! The cyan slash instantly struck Tyrag's armor, making bursts of piercing sword sounds. Yes, he is indeed Mr. Garp's son. Bogart obviously knew a lot of things. Seeing that his slash was easily blocked, he nodded happily. It was not as easy as he thought. Tyrage gasped and waved his numb arms a few times. The white mark left on it is where Bogart cut it. The power of one blow consumed a full tenth of my domineering energy before I could withstand it. Tyrage's face was gloomy. He was a little bit pessimistic. He always felt that his strength was growing rapidly in the past, but now he was educated. What he didn't know was that Bogart, who was as powerful as the Emperor's lieutenant, could fight against him. His casual slash was not something that just anyone could take. Chapter 8 Related Households. Monkey, Deet Tiger? Bogart took back his sword, took off his hat, and smiled politely. Just call me Talig, Dad asked me to come find you. Tirage rubbed his numb forearms, and Kaido was annoyed. He didn't like the meeting ceremony just now. Also starting from today, he doesn't like others to call him Tiger. As we all know, Marine hero Garp has two sons, both of whom are extremely talented and are called the Dragon and Tiger brothers. Free practice. 3,000 chops. Bogart turned to face the Marines and shouted. Yes, came the neat response. Bogart stretched out a hand and motioned for Talig to enter the tavern for a detailed discussion. Talig walked in front and pushed open the small double doors of the tavern. Due to Garp's return, the tavern was particularly cool and empty today. Only the young Mackinaw, with his back to the bar, was carefully wiping the wine glass in his hand. So much so that the people who came in didn't notice it, and even cursed in a low voice. Brother Stinky, brother stupid, you are a big fool, why don't you die? Tyrage stretched one foot into the tavern and paused in midair. It was neither going in nor not. What's wrong? Bogart, who was following him, asked aloud. Tyrage shook his head with a wry smile and coughed. Who? Maginot heard the cough and turned around instantly. After seeing the figure, her eyes became brighter. That, Sister Maginot, is me. Tarager waved his hand angrily and said with a smile. Maginot was quite happy at first, thinking that her brother was here to apologize to her. But after seeing clearly that there was a Marine following behind him, the smile on his face disappeared instantly, and he turned his back and said in annoyance. What are you here for? Pay back the money? Mr. Bogart, please give me a few minutes. Tyrage turned around and said apologetically. Bogart put his right hand on the scabbard, silently exited the tavern, leaned against the wall outside, and lowered his hat to block his sight. Are you leaving? At this time, Maginot had turned around, and the girl made of water had glistening eyes again. You know everything? Tarag raised his head in surprise. Maginot put down the cup and said. You drank too much yesterday, so you said it accidentally. Looking at Maginot, who was obviously unhappy, Tyrage lowered his head guiltily. I'm sorry, I should have talked to you a long time ago. None of that matters. Maginot walked around the bar and jumped directly into the arms of Talige, who was a head taller than her. Her pretty face was buried deep in his chest, her tears wet the lapel of Tyrage's clothes, and her shoulders shrugged. Tyrage's open hands were not put down for a long time, as if for a moment, he was completely stunned. Maginot spoke with a trembling voice. That's not important. I just want to know when my brother will come back. Will he let me wait until I grow old? Talige lowered his head, looked at his sister who was crying in his arms, and pretended to whisper in a deep voice. It's not that you will become yellow with old age, but it will take a long time. Maginot raised his head, his eyes were already bloodshot, thinking that he didn't sleep well last night. Tarek chuckled, pinched her nose and said with a smile. Stop crying, your face is stained with tears. Recruit will train for about 3 months. After that, I will find a relationship and come back to see you often. Maginot inadvertently wiped her nose secretly on Tai Lag's body, raised her head, and looked at him questioningly. Real? Talaj noticed her little move, but did not point it out. Instead, he nodded and responded with a smile. It must be true. Why don't you think about it? Who is my father? That's Marine's hero. When the time comes, give him gifts, go through the back door, and get promoted? Isn't that simple? As long as you become a general, just like the old man, I think there will be no problem in asking for leave every now and then. Talaj fell into his own fantasy, drawing a pie for Maginot that was not a dream. Maginot's belly was bulging after eating, and the smile on his face became brighter. The two of them chatted with each other, completely forgetting about Bogart outside the door. Boga pulled up his hat, his face looked a little ugly, and he drew out his sword several times and then put it down. Mr. Garp, are you sure that Talaj is your gift to Mr. Sengoku? Your explanation to Kong Fleet Admiral? Listening to the increasingly arrogant speeches in the tavern, Bogart seemed to see a scene in the future, where Mr. Warring States, leading dozens of warships, escorted Talaj back to the village. Listen, what are those words? Why do you mean that after you became Fleet Admiral, the first thing you did was to move your headquarters to Donghai? This is too blatant. Even if most of what you said is right, but... Squeak. The door was pushed open from the inside, and Talag walked out of it with a radiant face, and patted Bogart who was thinking about life by the wall. Shia smiled and said, Mr. Bogart, when are we going back to headquarters? I can't wait. Bogart shook his head, hoping that the man in front of him was just talking. Otherwise, with his strength and talent, coupled with Mr. Garp's relationship, the speed of promotion would be extremely exaggerated. Originally, I had many things to explain to you, but now it seems that it is not necessary. Bogart shook his head and sighed helplessly. 3 days later, at 8 o'clock in the morning, we will meet at the shore. We will not wait if you are late. After saying that, Bogart turned around and left. His impression of this person dropped to freezing point. Talaj rubbed his head and looked at his leaving figure, very puzzled. What's wrong with this guy? Did he offend him somewhere? Damn. Forgot to ask Marine how the food was. Talaj clapped his hands, the sky is big and the earth is big, eating is the biggest. His mouth has been spoiled by Mackinaw in the past few years. He eats other people's food and his throat is aggravated. System, let me know, I want the Grandmaster of Culinary Arts. System mission released, arrive at the port on time in 3 days and report to Marine Headquarters. Mission reward, Cooking Grandmaster. Sensible, let's get along slowly. After we get along for a long time, you will know what kind of person I am. Talaj gave a rare compliment to the system, and walked westward with his hands behind his back in satisfaction. I think, I already knew it. Mount Kalbo, the Dayton family. Boom. Tarek knocked on the door and was about to leave. He wanted to say goodbye to Sister Dayton and take a look at the little guy. Strange? Why not gate of opening? Talaj clenched his fists and knocked on the wooden door continuously. Boom. Pang. He failed to control his strength and accidentally broke the entire door. The scene that greeted his eyes made Talaj grin. I saw Dayton's family all lying on the ground helplessly, and everyone was sweating profusely. In the whole room, except for the sound of rapid breathing, the only thing left was little Ace on the table with a frozen smile. Time goes back to 5 minutes ago. Ha ha ha, old woman, why do you still want to catch me? Ace, who was only 3.5 years old, stood on the table with his hands on his hips, mocking the Dayton family for their incompetence. No, he is indeed that man's son. He is so young, but his physical strength is so amazing. The little Douglas was lying on the ground, breathing rapidly and sticking out his tongue. I eat too much, and I can barely feed myself anymore. The big man Magla lay next to him and responded weakly. This farce has lasted for more than an hour. The reason is that Ace wants to go out alone. In order to prove that he has a good ability to protect himself, Ace proposes this game of eagles and chickens. Can I go out now? Ha ha ha. Dayton, who was lying on the ground, raised his arms and sat on the ground, exhaled, shook his head and said, I don't have any say in this. You just promised me. Ace on the table pinched his waist, his childish voice echoed in the room, obviously unconvinced. Chapter 9. Nothing is as important as family. Boom. There was a knock on the door. Ace ignored it and asked, Old woman, who has the final say? Dayton's ears twitched, and he knocked on the door with 2 heavy and 1 light strokes, as if it was only that person. Pung. The sound of the wooden door breaking. I have the final say. Tyridge scratched his head in shame. He came to demolish the house again. Who do you think you are? The very arrogant little Ace cursed directly after hearing the sound, but after seeing the person clearly, his little face turned pale with fright. Tyridge raised his eyebrows slightly, glanced at little Ace, and ignored him. Instead, he carefully straightened the dismantled door. I wanted to install it back, but as soon as I lifted it up, the wooden door shattered all over the floor. I don't know why, but the domineering energy in my body has been a bit unstable recently, and it always leaks out uncontrollably. Talich decided to go back and ask his father what was going on. Don't be stunned, tell me, why do you want to go out? Tyridge threw the wood in his hand casually and walked over with a smirk on his face. Uncle, why are you here? Little Ace jumped off the table obediently, moved a chair over and placed it next to Tyridge. Don't call me uncle, who am I? Tyridge waved his hand, teasing little Ace who was already sweating. Little Ace covered his lower body with his hands and said with a trembling voice. Uncle, I was wrong, don't play that part of me. Cold sweat ran across Ace's face. It was obviously someone who had left an indelible memory on him. Looking at little Ace who was about to cry, Tyridge laughed out loud. He knelt down and picked up little Ace. Said softly. It's too early to go out now, you're too young. Little Ace in his arms secretly breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that his uncle would not play with him anymore. He curled his lips, raised his head and smiled proudly. But I'm already very powerful. Look, even Dayton and the others can't catch me. Talich looked at Dayton, the eldest sister, and said helplessly. Sister, you guys are overdoing your performance. Do you really want Ace to go out? As soon as Tylag finished speaking, all the members except Dayton got up from the ground and walked out of the door silently. Dayton sat up angrily, lit a cigarette, and said. The landlords don't have enough food left. That old B****************** D Garp knows how to exploit people. Tyridge stumbled and barely managed to avoid falling over. What did this make him say? Acting? What do you mean? Little Ace broke away from Talag's arm, jumped down, and trotted angrily in front of Dayton. Hey! Don't tell me that you couldn't catch me on purpose. Dayton lovingly pulled little Ace over and held him in his arms regardless of his objections and struggles. It was just a joke. How could she let such a young Ace go out alone? It's just that he feels lonely alone, so he can join his family to play with him. Let me go. Little Ace struggled for the last time and fell asleep at the speed of light while lying in Dayton's arms. He was only about 3 years old, and after an hour of running and playing, the little guy was already exhausted. Dayton tiptoed little Ace onto his own little bed and covered him with a quilt thoughtfully. He took a puff of cigarette, turned around and asked with a smile. Aren't you training at this time? Why did you come to my place? I'm leaving. Talich's eyes were slightly red and he whispered. His friendship with Sister Dayton has surpassed that of brother and sister. She can be said to be half of Tyridge's adoptive mother. When he was a child, his father Garp didn't always have time to take care of him. When Garp is on a mission, he will usually be sent to Dayton, who will raise him. Go? Where? Dedan asked as he blew out a smoke ring. Dedan 3 years ago was still very beautiful and had not gained weight. At that time, time had not left a single trace on her body. Now, after only taking care of Ace for 3 years, her body has obviously gained weight. Marine Headquarters. Tyrage said in a deep voice. Dedan bit his cigarette holder and said angrily. Garp. You can't hide the look in your eyes that wants to kill someone. Talag can be said to be her first child. Dedan devoted all her feelings to Talag and wanted him to grow up happily and safely. I didn't expect that old guy to take away Talag again just like he took away Dorag. If it weren't for this old B********************, I wouldn't believe that I couldn't catch Dorag. How could I fix it? Hey, don't get excited, I did it voluntarily. Tyrage grabbed the elder sister's arm. Are you half responsible for this impulsive character and Luffy's reckless character when he grows up? Volunteer? What's good about Marine? Like that old B*************************. Dedan threw away Talage's hand, pinched his waist and made an angry sound. Talage turned his head to the side and whispered. How about I ask him to come and talk to you tonight? Why is this door broken? This is another expense, hey. Dedan seemed to have flashed, and the speed of the instantaneous burst was actually faster than Talage's shave. When he turned around, Dedan was already standing near the broken door. She was cleaning up the broken wood on the ground with a serious look on her face, as if she was not the one who said those words just now. Bao. Bao changed his face. Tyrage covered his mouth and snickered. He didn't know what his father had done to make this eldest sister change her expression after hearing this. She was afraid of becoming like this. Dedan turned his back and bit his lower lip, mentally scolding the 2 bastards of the monkey family, the older one and the younger one, tens of thousands of times. Will threaten her. In a wooden house on the other side. Sneeze. Garp picked his nose and said angrily, Who is scolding me? Then, he picked up the half-meter-long milk bottle on the ground, pointed it at Luffy on the table, and smiled fondly. Little Luffy, Grandpa will wash you, feed Grandma. Tyrage walked out of Dedan's family with a melancholy look on his face. Although it was only a short farewell, he was still very reluctant to part with him. I don't know if it's okay to live in today's world. Tyrage sighed, took out the weights from the system space, and started today's training. The public execution 5 years ago completely set the entire sea on fire. Roger's speech before his death caused an uproar in the world. He opened a new chapter, and the era of great pirates has completely arrived. Want my treasure? Go find it. I put it all there. These few words, in that year, prompted about 70% of young people around the world to going out to sea to seek their dream and freedom. The target is the unknown One Piece left by Roger. The emerging pirates, holding high these 2 flags and carrying the irreversibility of the times, carry out inhumane killing, burning, looting and torture to realize their ridiculous desires. Marine represents justice, but justice eventually fades. Pirates represent freedom, but freedom is already evil. The celestial dragon represents the will of God, but God is also false. The Revolutionary Army represents the dawn, but the light before dawn has not yet illuminated the whole world. I can't do what my elder brother did, advocating revolution and becoming the enemy of the whole world. I can't do what my father did. For the sake of my own position, I watched my grandson die. People can be saved and protected, and positions can be taken up and held firmly, but these are not as important as family members. Talage, who had run around the windmill village 31 times, was lying on his back on the edge of a cliff, with his hands behind his head, watching the scattered lights of the village in the distance, silently lost in thought. Chapter 10 The 4 Stages of Domineering. In the early morning, after sleeping in the mountains all night, Telage's clothes were already wet with dew. Knocked lightly on Maginot's door. Squeak. Brother. Why are you here so early? Makino wiped his eyes sleepily, and after seeing the person clearly, his joy could not be expressed in words. The old man didn't give me the gate of opening. I accidentally fell asleep in the mountains last night. I remember you have my clothes here. I'll change them. Talij yawned and endured the pain in his body and said. Maginot made way to let Tarag in, while she diligently went to get him clothes. After entering the room, the two people looked at each other. You blinked, I blinked. In the end, it was Tylag who couldn't hold back and was the first to speak out. Hey! I want to change clothes, can't you turn around? Maginot curled her lips, turned around silently, and muttered. TCH, what are you afraid of? It's not like I haven't seen it before. The corners of Tyrage's mouth twitched, and he swore that he would never be drunk again. The world was full of dangers. Dad, the domineering energy in my body is often out of control. Why? Talij took the dishes brought by Maginot and asked doubtfully. After changing clothes at Maginot's house, Talij took her back home. Garp had just woken up and was now eating breakfast made by Maginot. Garp bit the bone-in C***k in his mouth, glanced at his son with relief, and said in surprise. Have we reached this point? There are differences in intensity and quantity of domineering, and it varies from person to person. Garp chewed the minced meat in his mouth and smiled proudly. Ha ha ha. Good boy, you have entered the surge period of domineering. Talij secretly reached across the dining table and quickly took back a big piece of meat. If he didn't eat it, the old man would finish it in a while. Taking a big bite of meat, he asked vaguely. What is the surge period? Garp glanced at his son's small movements. The iron fist was attached with a black-armed domineering force. Upon seeing this, Talag opened his mouth wide and swallowed the bones and meat together. Garp grinned, sighed and explained. Those who practice domineering will go through a stage where their total amount of domineering will increase significantly in a short period of time. Although everyone has it, I didn't expect you to reach this stage so quickly. It's incredible. Garp wiped his mouth and patted his bulging belly regardless of the image. Afterwards, he explained all the stages of domineering training to Tyrage in detail. The practice of domineering is divided into 4 stages. The first stage is the initial training period. Everyone's physical talent is different. The total amount of domineering he possesses at the beginning determines the upper limit of future growth. The second stage is the surge period. After a long period of training, your own domineering reaches a climax of rapid growth. And you have reached this stage. It is normal for your own domineering to be unstable, usually within a day or 2. It will take time to transition to the next stage. The earlier the second stage is reached, the better. Garp reached the surge stage when he was 18 years old and maintained this stage for 8 days. But he never thought that his second son would reach this stage 3 years earlier than he did back then. Garp gurgled down a bottle of cherry blossom wine that Maginot brought, and said with a bared smile. Ha ha ha, good wine. Immediately, he continued. The third stage is a stable period. The growth rate of domineering energy is obviously slowed down, but it will also increase steadily. Domineering energy can be expanded and released freely, and there will no longer be uncontrollable situations. Without waiting for Talij to ask, Garp continued. The fourth stage is solidification. At this stage, the growth of domineering has basically stagnated. Unless there are any accidents, there will generally not be any growth. It was the first time since he was a child to hear such a well-founded analysis from his father, and Tylag was still a little uncomfortable. Immediately, Suicide interrupted and asked. Are you really my dad? Iron fist. A black sandbag hit him head-on. Pung! Maginot walked out of the kitchen with the last dish in hand. When she saw her brother lying on the ground, she shook her head and smiled helplessly. She has seen this scene often and has become accustomed to it. As long as the two of them stay in the same place for more than 30 minutes, the elder brother will definitely receive the iron fist of love. Tyrage covered the big bump on his head, got up with a nonchalant expression, and continued eating like a normal person. It is natural for a father to beat his son. He will not say anything. This means I can't beat it. So, am I in the surge stage now? What do I need to do? It's not the same thing if my domineering power is always uncontrolled. Tyrage smiled at Maginot next to him, gave a thumbs up, and praised her for her excellent cooking. Garp burped, picked his nose, and left his seat. He was going to feed Luffy. He turned his back and said angrily, "Maintain your current basic training and try to extend the surge phase as much as possible. But in just a few days, you will enter a stable phase, and then your domineering power will naturally expand and contract freely." Because there was only a back view, Talej could not see the pride and joy on his father's face. Garp secretly thought happily, "This kid is really a genius. He entered the domineering stage at the age of 15. If he doesn't become a marine, it will be a loss to the whole world." Talej shook his head in confusion. How many days will it enter a stable period? However, his uncontrollable domineering situation has been maintained for half a month. And as early as a year ago, he had some signs of this. Although it is not obvious, the problem of unstable domineering has always troubled him. This is also the reason why he has never been able to wrap his domineering energy around objects. It is precisely because he is not under his own control. After the training ended half a month ago, Talej intuitively felt the restlessness of domineering for the first time. As long as the body exerts a little force, the domineering energy in the body will emerge involuntarily. "Makino, I need an ice pack." Dad returned to the house, and Talej turned his head pitifully and looked at his sister beside him. "I just held back my screams just now, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." Hiss. "Who made your uncle angry again? You deserve it." Maginot put down her knife and fork, wiped the corners of her mouth gracefully, and rolled her eyes at Talej. Although he said this, he still got up and went to the kitchen to get an ice pack and apply it on him. 2 days later, the port of Windmill Village. The huge dog-headed warship docked on the shore, and hundreds of sailors, under the command of Bogart, boarded the warship back to the headquarters in an orderly manner. "Brother, come back soon, I will always wait for you." Maginot stood at the front of the villagers, waving her little hands, watching her brother leave. "Don't worry. I will come back to see you often. Goodbye everyone." Talej climbed onto the dog's head in front of the warship, waved his little hands, and said goodbye to Maginot and the villagers in the village. On the other side, Bogart stood behind Garp, who was holding Luffy, and said in a low voice, "Mr. Garp, do you really not want to go back together? Mr. Sengoku will not allow you to stay here for a long time. Yesterday, the Ministry of Information issued the latest reward order. There is a red-haired kid who is causing trouble in the Grand Line. General, he wants you to go and have a look." Garp kept looking at Talej above the warship and didn't care at all about Bogart's words. It didn't matter whether he took this long vacation without their permission or not. For Luffy's sake, he had already prepared for the worst. That kid on Roger's boat? I can't care about him now. Go ahead and hand him over to Zifa. This is what I told Marine. After Garp said the last words, he ignored Bogart beside him, hugged Luffy, and returned to the village with an ugly expression. Chapter 11 Malinfando. Bogart held up his hat, dodged, and appeared on the deck. Set sail. Destination. Headquarters. Malinfando. Yes. The navigator saluted Bogart with a standard military salute, then trotted to the helm and shouted, "Sail. Set sail." On the other side, Tarig stood alone at the stern of the boat, until he could no longer see the man waving on the shore. He turned around in despair, sighed and said with a smile, "Mr. Bogart, please come out." Bogart, who was hiding in the dark and observing silently, was startled when he heard the sound. He had used his sense of domineering to disguise his aura, but was he still aware of it? Bogart slowly walked out of the shadows and asked aloud, "How did you do it?" "What?" Talej was puzzled. "How did you discover me?" "Logically speaking, there is no flaw in my disguise," Bogart said. When Talej heard this, he was stunned for a moment, recalled the past, and closed his eyes in pain. When he was 7 years old, he was hung up and beaten by an old man just because he lost a small piece of fruit, which really broke his heart. But because of this, he initially awakened to the power of seeing and hearing at the age of 7, which also saved him from receiving a lot of punches. Talej did not explain, but glanced at the warship that was getting faster and faster, and asked aloud. At this speed, how long does it take to get to the headquarters? Bogart shook his head secretly. This child's talent is simply too outstanding. If he hadn't made some remarks that were not conducive to unity, Mr. Garp might have become an outstanding Marine as he wished. I hope he is overthinking it. If nothing else happens, we can arrive tomorrow morning after crossing the windless zone. With my ability, do I still need to report to the recruiting camp? Tyridge asked with a sheepish smile. If possible, he would like to skip the novice stage of development, go straight to work with a certificate, and clock out. Bogart drew several black lines on his forehead and said stiffly. Mr. Garp recommended you to Mr. Zifa, and you will go to the officer training camp led by him for further studies. Tyridge nodded. Uncle Zifa came to Windmill Village 3 years ago and he still knew him. Thinking about it this way, there seems to be nothing unusual about Marine headquarters. Brother Akiji used to be his father's apprentice and follower, and he met him more than once. And he was chasing a certain birdman a year ago. She happened to pass by the East China Sea and also visited the Windmill Village. When he was a child, Uncle Waring States often came to Windmill Village to arrest Garp, who came back from leave without reason. It's really not that Tyridge wants to lie down, the relationship is really too strong. A proper official second generation, he can't do it without being arrogant. What else did my dad say? It can't be just attending an officer training camp, right? Tyridge frowned and didn't quite believe his father. He just asked him to simply participate in a training class. Bogart covered his forehead. If he didn't say that you are a family, he would be right. Mr. Garp's original words were that brat must break the record set by Akainu Kizaru and the others, otherwise I will let him see the power of galaxy impact. Bogart tried his best to imitate Garp's tone when he said this sentence, but it was only the form, not the spirit. But Tyridge still got goosebumps all over his body. Hey, you hit your son with your ultimate move? What's the difference between this and hitting mosquitoes with a cannon? He twisted his lips and said with a wry smile. I'll try my best. The records left by Marines 3 monsters cannot be broken casually. In recent decades, among the millions of Marines, only 3 people have emerged. Bogart gave a rare smile and repeated firmly. It's not about trying your best, it's about having to. The Marine headquarters, Marinvando, is located in the center of the Grand Line, adjacent to the Sabayati Islands, the Red Continent, and the Holy Land of Mariajoya. The island looked down from above shows a crescent shape, and the headquarters building is built on the mountain topography. The warship passed smoothly through the windless zone without any danger, and the face of the sea was still shrouded in the gauze of night, and it was quiet. But Tyridge on the deck could already vaguely see the flag of justice fluttering in the wind far, far away in the sky. Looking at the mountains is like running to death, especially at sea, until the sky in the distance gradually turns fishbelly white. Only then did this crescent island appear before Tyridge's eyes. Following the warship all the way, after passing 5 routine inquiries at checkpoints, I successfully landed at a certain shipyard. Gather. Bogart gave an order, and all the Marines on the ship, regardless of whether they had work at hand or not, immediately ran to the deck. Take a rest for an hour and gather at the West Training Ground. For these newly recruited sailors, training will become their daily routine in the future. Although he was only watching from a distance on the warship, the majestic building in the center still gave Tyridge a great shock. Sure enough, screen and reality are 2 completely different concepts. He also intuitively felt how majestic the Marine headquarters was, which could easily deploy 100,000 elite troops. Thinking about it carefully, what level of strength will Whitebeard reach, who split the headquarters in 2 with 1 punch? Bogart stretched out his hand and waved it in front of the dazed Talig, and said in confusion. What's wrong? Are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere? Although he didn't have a very good impression of Tyridge, for Mr. Garp's sake, he still had to take care of him as much as possible. Tyridge shook his head, showing his iconic teeth, and laughed. Ha ha ha. I'm fine, I'm just a little excited. Bogart nodded in understanding, remembering that he had the same mood when he followed Mr. Garp to the headquarters for the first time. Let's go, I have informed them in advance to pick you up. You will be a transfer student and become the student of this class led by Mr. Zifa. Tyridge followed him, a little confused. Transfer student? With my talent, shouldn't I be in a separate class? He calculated the current time and thought that at the same time this time, two people he was familiar with should appear. Competing with him is not a big deal, but it can also add some fun to this boring training. From the corner of his eye, Bogart caught a glimpse of Tyrag's disdainful face behind him, and the corners of his mouth curled up inexplicably. The greatness of Mr. Zifa is precisely his ability to teach students in accordance with their aptitude. Currently, almost all of Marine's officers are his students, and each of them can grow even better with his help. I hope the person behind me can still laugh after entering. Waring states, that old guy really said that? You still agreed? Zifa took off the sunglasses on his forehead, looking shocked. Waring states smashed the table in front of him with one punch, and his eyes seemed to pop out. Roar out loud. Do you think I want to? That old B**************** D gave me two choices, either he quit Marine or gave him 5 years of vacation. Zifa shook his head, lit a cigar helplessly, and sat in silence on a chair nearby. If it doesn't work out, are you going to take a trip to capture him? This kind of thing was done a lot before the Warring States period, but Zifa hadn't realized the seriousness of the matter yet, so he said this. Warring States slumped on the seat helplessly, shook his head and said, no, the old B************ D is serious this time. It will affect the image reflected by the phone bug, and his hair will turn white. Warring States took off his glasses and wiped the corners of his eyes, but he hadn't seen him for 2 months, and he didn't know what his old brother had gone through to make such a huge change. You go ahead, he sent his son here to educate him well. Zifa was also in a bad mood. He took a deep breath, got up and returned to the training camp. Chapter 12. Be gentle. The officer training camp that Zifa is responsible for is located in the deepest part of Crescent Island, behind the Marine headquarters building. The wall made of bricks and stones mixed with seafloor stones is surrounded by many people. It is impossible to see the situation inside the wall from the outside. If outsiders want to enter, except Zifa himself, they need his or another general's signature. As for the students who are being trained inside, no matter what reasons you have, you are not allowed to step out of the training camp until you successfully graduate. The training camp is large enough to accommodate tens of thousands of Marines training at the same time, and it also provides all living and entertainment facilities. This place was temporarily allocated to Zifa for training. At the same time, it was also a storage base for combat readiness resources. Tyridge followed closely behind Bogart. Along the way, the closer you get to this place, the more you can feel the tension in the air. It seems like a silent ancient battlefield. The ground was covered with thick dust, and every step made a dull sound. You can go there yourself. The person on duty guarding the training base this month is Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. Mr. Sengoku has already greeted him in advance. Bogart and Talig stood 100 meters in front of the training base. This was the limit of what others could approach. Okay, thank you for taking care of me these 2 days. Tyridge nodded, took a deep breath, took steps, and officially opened his new chapter. Stop. The Flying Squirrel has a mohawk hairstyle on his head, with long dark purple hair tied behind his head to form a bun, and his mustache is also dark purple. When Tyridge was about to push open the training base door, a long knife was inserted under his feet. Tyridge frowned slightly. It was just a military academy, so he wouldn't go under the knife, right? The color of sight and hearing is released quietly, and it's okay not to feel it. After this perception, Tyridge's whole person is not feeling well. There were at least 200 hidden auras, aiming their spears at his head in a hidden place, ready to shoot him there at any time. Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. Tyridge stood up straight, puffed out his chest, raised his hand and saluted. The Flying Squirrel nodded, holding a picture of Talig in his hand, comparing it back and forth, and after confirming it was correct, waved his hand. Tyridge's expression moved slightly and he breathed a sigh of relief. Those hundreds of dangerous auras disappeared. Mr. Garp's son? The Flying Squirrel gave a rare smile. The tiger father has no dog son, and this has already been shown in that man. Yes, Mr. Lieutenant General. Tarago did not let his guard down, respectfully Kaido. The flying squirrel nodded, gave Talig an encouraging look and said, "Go in and don't live up to Mr. Garp's expectations." The flying squirrel left a word, his figure flashed, and disappeared again. When Tyrage came back to his senses, the samurai sword in front of him had disappeared, leaving only a very deep sword mark. There are so many marine experts, and all the dignified lieutenants are here to guard the gate. Tellage thought to himself as he pushed open the door of the training base. This is a training camp? Tellage looked back at the closed door behind him, and then at the tall buildings and unknown construction facilities in front of him. If he hadn't known where this was in advance, he would have thought he had gone to some big city. My thinking is out of date. The officer training camp and the soldier training ground are definitely different. He shook his head secretly, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and headed straight for the tallest building in the middle. Report. In front of the Iron Blood building was a large training ground. More than 50 Marines were doing push-ups to warm up when they were interrupted by this loud report. They stood up one after another, quickly assembled their teams, and looked back and forth at the new transfer student with curious eyes. Are you coming? At the front of all the Marines, there was a huge parasol with a deck chair placed under the umbrella. The person on the deck chair was none other than Marine General Zifa, nicknamed Black Arm. Hey, this is the first time I've heard that there are transfer students in the officer training camp. At the front of the Marine queue, the young smoker whispered. Zifa notified them of the transfer student news not long ago. The 17-year-old smoker is not yet arrogant. He has a white face and short silver hair, and looks very energetic. Tina is very angry about this. We went through many selections before we came here and were fortunate enough to receive training from teacher Zifa. He walked in so easily, which lowered our value as an outstanding officer. Tina is very disappointed with this. The person who responded to Smoker was Tina, who is the same age as Tyrage. She has short pink hair parted in the middle, a pair of purple sunglasses on her forehead, and a smart female training uniform. She has a sassy youthful girlish vibe. Humph, I don't know what he is capable of. Has Marine fallen enough to use the back door? Smoker said unhappily, reaching out to touch his clothes, but remembering that it was still training time, his desire to smoke a cigar faded away. These comments were not deliberately concealed, and they easily reached Tellage's ears. At this time, he had already walked to Zifa, dismissing the dozens of future Marine officers in front of him. I'm very happy that your father can let you come, but they don't accept it. What should I do? Zifa did not get up to stop him, but lay on the recliner and asked with a smile showing his teeth. Easy, defeat them. Tyrage stood upright next to Zifa, with his hands behind his back, standing in a standard military posture, and did not lower his voice. Boy, don't be too arrogant. The grumpy smoker was the first to stand up and express his dissatisfaction. Tina is very unhappy. The people you are looking down on are the most outstanding people among the younger generation of Marine. That's right, after we finish training, don't leave. Let's practice alone. In this training camp led by Zifa, Smoker and Tina had the best results. With their leadership. The Marines behind also raised their fists and looked at Zifa on the recliner. As long as he gave the order and allowed them to move freely, he would go up and tear the new transfer student into pieces in a matter of minutes. Report. Smoker took a step forward and saluted Zifa. Speak. I apply to spar with this new guy. His eyes seemed to be on fire as he stared at the indifferent Talig. Zifa raised his hand and pushed his sunglasses to his forehead. He did not respond to Smoker, but turned to look at Tarig beside him and asked. How are these students of mine? Uncle, do you want to hear the truth or lies? Tyrage still looked indifferent, not paying attention to the provocations or requests for a fight from the people in front. What about lies? What about truth? Their conversation was not hidden, and all the Marines in front also pricked up their ears. I plan to listen to what this new arrogant person thinks of them. Tina is also very interested. Tina folded her arms, with a curious look on her face, and called teacher Zifa uncle? Is she really a related party? Tyrich's emotions were fully activated, and he quickly enveloped everyone including Zifa. But the feedback from consciousness, except for the fiery red breath on the recliner next to him, the others are as thin as gauze, as light as water. He shook his head and sighed. I don't deny my uncle's strength and excellent teaching skills, but... Zifa waved his hand and said. But it doesn't matter. Talich nodded and said seriously. Okay, it's a lie, they are just a mess. The more than 50 Marines in front, including Smoker and Tina, all frowned, but then slowly relaxed. After all, this sentence seems to be a curse, but it is false. Here, call me teacher. So what's the truth? Zifa frowned. Was the aura that appeared just now released by this kid? Yes. Teacher Zifa. Tyrich changed his words, then curled his lips slightly, rubbed the back of his head and said with a smile. To be honest, they are just a bunch of rabble. Hold. Smoker, who was at the front of the team, swore harshly. I thought this arrogant guy would have something nice to say, but with one sentence, they all died on the beach. Without saying a word, his impulsive personality prompted him not to even ask for instructions. He directly pulled out the 10 hands behind him, took a step forward, and rushed towards Tyrich beside Zifa. Zifa did not blame Smoker for his impulsiveness, but sighed helplessly and said. Be gentle. Chapter 13 Dragon Claw Fist. I try my best. The corners of Tyrich's mouth raised slightly, and there was a smile in his eyes. His eyes are very beautiful, the lavender light flowing in an instant. Even Tina on the other side, who couldn't help but take action, felt very amazing and couldn't help but praise secretly in her heart. You are quite delicate and have beautiful eyes. Tina admires it very much, but Tina doesn't like the tone of your words just now. Tina silently put on her own fighting gloves. If Smoker couldn't defeat him, it would be up to her to save them from the humiliation this man had brought to them. Don't overestimate your own capabilities. Facing Smoker, who was holding 10 hands and rushing towards him at extremely fast speeds, Tyrich shook his head helplessly. Shave. The smile on the corner of Tyrich's mouth never disappeared. He used the shaving technique in the 6th Marine style to avoid the heavy blow swung by Smoker. In the blink of an eye, the person was behind Smoker. The 10 hands struck the thick ground, making a heavy muffled sound. When he glanced around, he saw that the place where Smoker struck had been torn apart, showing the terrifying power of this blow. How is that possible? Smoker quickly turned around and faced Talich head-on. His pupils shrank slightly and he secretly cursed. I have been practicing the move this guy just used for more than a month, but I haven't mastered its essence yet, but he used it easily. He is a very strong opponent. Haven't you eaten that thing yet? On the other side, Tyrich sighed secretly. If Smoker had eaten that Logia smoke fruit, he might still be playing with Smoker, but there's no need now. Smoker noticed his shaking of his head, and couldn't help but became angry with embarrassment, shouting as if his eyes were splitting. Stop looking down on others. Using a 3-point speed faster than before, he tried to get close to Talich again. I'm different from a wild beast who has to use all his strength to catch a rabbit. This is enough to deal with you. Faced with Smoker attacking again, Tyrich did not choose to evade, but stood there, quietly waiting for Smoker's arrival. Dragon Claw Fist. With his excellent sense of perception, Tyrich swayed slightly and easily dodged Smoker's 10-handed attack. I saw the forward movement of his right hand, similar to the posture of 3 dragon claws. When Smoker's old strength was exhausted and new strength was not regenerated, a powerful dragon-clawed hand clasped on his skull. The outcome has been decided. Tarich's face was indifferent. He put one hand behind his back and spoke in a relaxed and normal tone. His relaxed and carefree victory posture stunned everyone present. Even Zifa, who always paid attention to the details of the battle, shook his head frequently and said, "The gap is too big. It seems that training them together will not have a positive stimulating effect, but will destroy the self-confidence of these students." Not only did Zifa meet Talich 3 years ago, but that old B*************** D Garp always praised his second son every time he came back to the headquarters from home. The phrase, "he is worthy of being my son," has become his mantra. Zifa and Warring States are extremely envious of this. He is already so old, and after that person, there is a new successor. All these signs made Zephagor look at Talig more than once, trying to overestimate his strength. But he never thought that he still underestimated the growth rate of Talig, and the stimulus plan was stillborn. Stop joking, do you think you'll win like this? Because he had promised Zifa before, Talag's right hand had not exerted any force yet, and he simply clasped it on it. As a result, Smoker, who did not suffer any harm, was very unconvinced. While roaring angrily, he waved his weapon 10 hands, and smashed it at Talig in front of him. Seeing this, Tyrage sighed, "I can only apologize, Uncle Zifa, who made your students disobedient." Crack! The dragon's claw hand clasped on Smoker's skull with slight force, and a crisp sound, accompanied by Smoker's cry of pain, spread throughout the entire training ground. Ah! The 10 hands in Smoker's hand fell vertically to the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. He also knelt down on the ground. This phenomenon caused an uproar. Most of the Marines were shocked by this blow and covered their mouths. I can't imagine that the number 1 player in their class could not even make a single move in the hands of this person. Are you talking about sparring or murder? Seeing the tragic situation of her former friend with her own eyes, Tina couldn't stand it anymore and stepped forward to question him. Talig turned around, spread his hands and said, "I said the victory has been decided, and he will continue to fight. It's just a slight bone fracture, and he will be fine in a few days." Tina gritted her teeth and looked at Teacher Zifa aside. After getting his nod of permission, the body jumped slightly and landed next to Tarig, and said with an indifferent expression, "Tina doesn't like you, then I will be your opponent. Kyoshin." After saying that, Tina opened her arms, extended the fence-like iron branches, and quickly surrounded Tyrag in the training ground. She bit her silver teeth lightly. In order to avenge Smoker, Tina decided to teach him a lesson and shouted, "Strangulation." As soon as he finished speaking, the black iron fence surrounding Talig quickly shrank toward the center at a terrifying speed. After seeing and hearing the color, Tyrage smiled bitterly and said, 360 degrees with no blind spots. If the countless iron branches extending from above were inserted into it, someone would die. Tina stood not far away, stretching her arms to release her ability. She did not give up the attack because of Tyrage's seemingly submissive words. Talig didn't mean to beg for mercy, he just felt a little, raised a smile at the corner of his mouth and said, "Armed and entangled. He is worried recently. There is too much domineering energy in his body. How to solve it? Just take this opportunity to release more, so as not to let them fight and collide in your body." The black-armed domineering force quickly wrapped around Tyrage's body, fitting tightly without any blind spots. This form can be seen in Don Quixote Doflamingo's subordinate, Ghost Bamboo Virgo. This form can be achieved by anyone as long as the total amount of their own hegemony is sufficient. It is just a normal battle. There is no need to consume your own hegemony like this. Instead of wasting it and covering the whole body, it is better to concentrate it accurately on one point. While it lasts, the power will be greatly enhanced. Ding 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 ding. The fence completely shrunk, and Tina's feathers successfully hit Talig, who was still on the spot. With a crisp sound, the countless iron branches that hit him broke. The speed is sufficient, but the strength is insufficient. Tyrage, who was temporarily trapped by Chi Yushin, made a pertinent comment. Tina bit her teeth lightly and continued to release her abilities unwillingly. She didn't believe that this person's armed domineering energy was endless and inexhaustible. Genius? Monster? It seems we can no longer call him that. Since Tyrage used this form, Zifa could no longer sit still on the recliner. He threw away his sunglasses and quickly stood up to take a closer look. The color of seeing and hearing was released, and it was aimed at Tyrage in the field, and the perception fed back to him was. The total content of the surge of domineering energy has exceeded that of him and Sengoku, and is infinitely close to Garp's level. Although there is still a big gap in quality and application, it cannot be underestimated. Thinking about Tyrich's current age, Zifa couldn't predict where his future growth limit would be. Not even the 3 monsters he taught gave him this feeling. You must know that the physical skills, techniques, dominance, and fruit development ability of those 3 people. It was already infinitely close to the limit that humans could reach. Even so, it was not as shocking as Tyrich now. Chapter 14 Dao Heart is broken. Your name is Tina, right? For your own good, let me go. Tyrich, who was temporarily trapped by Tina's Biao Yujian, turned his head and smiled. Tina raised her eyebrows lightly. Both sides were in a stalemate. Why should I let go? She snorted coldly. Huh. Tina is extremely disappointed. Are you just a man of this level? Use all your strength and don't let Tina look down on you. Black spear formation. Hundreds of black iron spears appeared behind Tina, and their spear points were pointed at Tarag in front. Tyrich shook his head. Since his good intentions were regarded as disrespectful, he would not be merciful. I just hope that the beautiful lady in front of me can withstand the consequences of the fruit's power backlash. Then as you wish. Tyrich slowly lowered his head and raised an evil smile at the corner of his mouth. Stop pretending, take a cutting. Seeing what this man was going to do, Tina decided to strike first. Hundreds of spears behind her. Under her control, she shot at Tyrag in the field at a terrifying speed. And at this critical moment, Tyrich took a deep breath, raised his head. He looked at the hundreds of black spears fired at him without fear. Kaka. Ah. Tyrich's right arm seemed to be unimpeded. Amid Tina's cry of pain, the iron fence broke with a sound, and Talag easily broke away from Tina's restraints with his body strength. Immediately, he retracted his full-body armed form, gathered his domineering energy into his right arm, put his fist back to his waist, and squatted down. I saw, accompanied by external black lightning, looming around the clenched fist. Meteor impact. Amid Tyrich's roar, a white beam of light shot into the sky, blocking everyone's sight. The huge meteorite shock wave not only destroyed all the black spears that struck from the air, but even the battlefield under Tyrich's feet began to fall apart. Are you kidding? This guy is our contemporary? The Marines outside the venue were blinded by the soaring beam that had not been extinguished for a long time, and their self-confidence suffered an unprecedented blow. What's more, they collapsed to the ground helplessly. With the existence of such a monster, is there any point in them continuing to fight? Tina is unwilling. Bang! All the barriers created by Tina's ability were destroyed by Tyrag's punch, including the body's feather sill. The severe exhaustion of physical strength caused her to lose consciousness and fall heavily to the ground. Tears of reluctance slowly ran down her face. It seems like too much force. Tyrich scratched the back of his head and smiled sheepishly. What was a brand new fighting venue a minute ago was now completely scrapped, the ground was torn apart, and the surrounding training facilities were torn apart, covered in dust and a mess. Turning his head and looking at the Marines who were collapsed on the ground behind him, Tyrich trotted angrily to Zifa, whose jaw dropped in shock and had not recovered for a long time. He lowered his head and whispered. I'm sorry, uncle, I was trying new moves and didn't master the strength. Tyrich apologized on the lips, but he was happy in his heart. These 2 battles were not all fruitless. At the very least, the domineering energy in his body has successfully passed the surge period and officially entered a stable period where he can control it freely. This is also the reason why he can use Daddy Garp, the prototype of the ultimate stunt at the bottom of the box. Although the meteorite impact is less than 10% of the power of the galaxy impact, it is enough for Telage to be proud of. Did that old guy teach you? Zifa did not blame him, but looked at the battlefield that seemed to have been baptized for a long time, and asked with a trembling voice. Tyrich curled up his lips, angrily. Kaito said. My father never had time to teach me. A few years ago, a group of unknown pirates appeared near Windmill Village. My father was on vacation at that time. A mile away, a galactic impact hit the pirate ship. There's nothing left. Tyrage recalled the unsightly past, still feeling angry. It was the first time he witnessed his father take action, but it left a deep impression on him. Also after that time, Dad Garp threatened him with galaxy impact at every turn. Zifa twisted his stiff neck, looked at the son of his old friend beside him, and said in disbelief. After reading it once, you will know it? What if? Tyrage raised his head in confusion. It wasn't that difficult, he just condensed his domineering energy in one place and punched. Isn't it simple? Tyrage once again asked his soul. If he hadn't been able to control more domineering energy in his body, the punch just now would not have been a casual, falling star. Yes. That's right. It's so simple, you will definitely know it after reading it once. Zifa almost gritted his teeth. Kaido flicked the cloak of justice behind him, and walked in front of the Marines who had not yet recovered from the shock. Everyone is here. Assemble. Zifa roared angrily, and all the Marines heard the familiar command and quickly stood up like a reflex, standing up straight at different heights. Smoker and Tina had already been carried away for treatment by medical staff, so Talag didn't know any of the remaining people. Zifa walked from the beginning to the end of the team, looked around and checked everyone's mental state. But the more than 40 students who always lowered their heads and did not dare to look at him made Zifa extremely heartbroken. I made a wrong move. They shook their heads helplessly. The fighting spirit in their eyes was gone. Before Tyrage came here, even though he knew that he was very outstanding, in Zifa's heart, he was never placed on the same level as Akainu and others. This mistake caused the tragedies that happened to Porcellino and Sakaski that year to happen again many years later. There were only 3 people who came out of that training camp, and that was the current Kizaru, Akainu, and that one. Everyone, raise your heads. Zifa couldn't bear to give up on this group, and the sailors who were confused about themselves couldn't help but roar. But it was all in vain. Even if they raised their heads obediently, Zifa could only see darkness through the window that reflected their souls. One person's excellence can encourage latecomers to catch up, one person's genius can stimulate the fighting spirit of latecomers, and one person's monster can lead latecomers forward. But some kind of unspeakable young monster appeared in front of this group of talented, high-spirited and young Marine recruits. They used their strength, which they had worked hard all their lives for, but could not bring into full play. This terrifying, endless gap completely destroyed their enthusiasm to improve their own strength and their perseverance to sweat. Since hard work is in vain, why not give it up until the end? Why? Zifa sighed. The tragedy happened again. What should he do to save it? At this time, Tylag also discovered that the atmosphere in the silent training ground was a bit strange. After seeing, hearing, and feeling released, most of the information fed back to him was disappointment, helplessness, and confusion. Uncle, let me do it. You? Zifa paused, but did not stop him. Instead, he got out of the way. Silently walked behind Tellage to see if he could save the determination of these sailors. Chapter 15 Responsibility. Talag, who was standing in front of all the Marines, glanced around. Not only did he not offer any words of comfort. Instead, he frowned slightly and said sarcastically, "If I were you, I wouldn't stand here right now. Instead, I would take off the cloak of justice behind me and get out of here. You are no longer as good as a new recruit. You have lost the qualifications to become an excellent Marine." The extremely insulting words reached the ears of every sailor. Although their confidence has been destroyed, this is not the reason why Tellage can humiliate them casually. From behind the team, a sailor with tears in his eyes walked out and shouted excitedly, "You fart! How can a monster like you understand our pain? We have been training hard for more than 3 months, but the best smoker can't make a move in your hands, and the same goes for Tina." The sailor continued to roar. "It doesn't take hard work to get results. We work hard all our lives. It's just your starting point. Stop looking down on others." The sailor roared one last time, and in pain, he tore off the justice cloak behind him. He walked step by step to the flag of justice in front of the Iron Blood building, gave a standard salute, and gently placed the cloak in his hand under the Marine flag. Oh. 3 months? What makes you think? Your 3 months of training can be worth my 10 years of hard training in winter and summer. Talladge used the six-style shaver, moved in front of the Marine soldier under the flag, and kicked him back to the team. My father's name is Monkey D. Garp, I believe you are familiar with him. Talladge stood back to his previous position and said. Yes, it's that Marine hero. Lieutenant General Garp. There were shocked sounds in the Marine crowd, and everyone was talking in disbelief. Talladge nodded and admitted, and said calmly. As long as you know me, I just want to tell you. Talent only accounts for a small part of the origin of my strength. Hard work is not in vain. For 10 years, my father threw me into bottomless cliffs, desolate mountains, jungles at night, endless oceans, muddy swamps, cold glaciers. Painful memories came to mind again, and Talladge told all about the torture he had suffered over the years. Garp, I admire. Zifa's eyes were as wide as copper bells. Talladge's half-hour narration made Zifa feel inferior in terms of educating students. I secretly decided to ask Talladge to write a report after I return. Such a good training method cannot be buried like this. The empathy and even more miserable training experience made all the Marines fall into silence and no longer talked about the 3 months of training. Seeing that the time was almost up, Talladge pointed to the high-hanging flag of justice beside the iron-blooded building in the back and said. Ask yourselves, what do you want to gain by coming to this training camp? Is it to improve your own strength? Is it to get tickets for military rank promotion? Or is it for the justice you hold on to in your hearts? Talladge shook his head slowly, raised his voice, and said excitedly. No. None. Zifa furrowed his brows and secretly shouted, not good. This brat's speech was a bit dangerous. Any words related to justice should not be discredited in the slightest. Just as he was about to interrupt, Talladge's voice came one after another. It seems to me that you are here just to take one thing. After a pause to give them time to react, he looked at the flag flying high in the sky and said. Give your youth, sweat, and even your lives. Just to take away the word responsibility. The responsibility as a soldier. The responsibility to protect your future soldiers. Use the power you have to protect the world with the responsibility and determination. The impassioned speech was so shocking that all Marines raised their heads and looked at the flag of justice fluttering in the wind. Responsibility. Guard. Determination. The Marines murmured to themselves, with the last hint of confusion in their eyes. As they clarified their hearts, they once again exuded youthful vitality. For justice. The Marine who was kicked back to the team by Talladge earlier shouted with tears of faith on his resolute face. For justice. Times 51. All Marines, including Zifa and Talladge, saluted the Marine flag in front of them. They shouted in unison, as if breaking through the sky, and they saved themselves. Responsibility makes people strong, brave, and fearless, and it also makes people know care and understanding. These Marine recruits, who are full of kindness and justice in their hearts, found their own direction once again. Zifa looked up to the sky and laughed happily, sighing secretly. Old guy, you have a successor. With him here, Marine can still prosper for 50 years. After the ceremony, Talladge stood at the head of the Marine queue in a sensible manner, obeying Teacher Zifa's orders. Zifa withdrew his smile, and the tragedy was averted, but training should not be neglected. He looked at Talladge and asked. May I have your name? Zifa wanted these students to know who pulled them back from the dark abyss. When the farce ended, Talladge saluted Zifa and said. Report, my name is Monkey D. Talladge. The voice that was neither humble nor arrogant reached the ears of every sailor and was remembered by them. Zifa asked again. Then what's your name now? Report. My name is Recruit. Zifa grinned. He liked this answer. He looked around at all the students, shook his head and said. I am very disappointed in you. From today on, all of you will have no names and will be renamed rookies. Zifa pointed at Talag and said. Starting from you, you are called Rookie Number 1, and we will go from there in order. Yes. My name is Rookie Number 1. Tyrage puffed up his chest, not showing any arrogance due to his improvement in strength. Compared to these old guys, he was still far behind. If this were the case in the past, Zifa's name change, not to mention all, but there would definitely be a lot of dissatisfaction. But Talag agreed to call him a rookie. Who among the people behind him would dare to say anything? You take them to run around the training ground. They do 1 lap and you run 10 laps. Treat today as an exception. Zifa is no longer in the mood to continue training. He wanted to go and have a chat with Sengoku about Talag's arrangements, so he simply gave the running order. Report, when did you run away? Talag asked aloud. Zifa had already walked towards the exit, waved his hand and said casually. Until you faint. Yes. Talag answered loudly, but then scratched his head in confusion. If he didn't bear any weight, could he really faint? Talag. The name of the person who was kicked away by Talag earlier was Ayla, standing next to him. As soon as he called his name, he was interrupted by Talag with a wave of his hand and said with a smile. Call me Rookie Number 1, do you understand? Ella nodded to show her understanding, her admiring eyes always staying on him. Rookie Number 1, when do we start? Then there's no need to ask, now. After saying that, Tyrage was the first to run out. After all, they had 1 lap and he had 10 laps. This goal was not something that could be accomplished easily. He really said that. Warring States got excited and kicked the goat beside him, and the beast ate the important documents again. You've asked me 13 times, really? Zifa silently crushed the wooden chair next to him, realizing for the first time that Warring States was so boring. Warring States scratched his head in embarrassment, took out a pile of senbei from the cabinet and placed it on the table. I just didn't expect that Garp, that B**********************, D, would have such an outstanding son. Zifa looked at a table of senbei and wondered. After eating these, aren't you afraid that he will come after you from the East China Sea? Humph, I can't ask for more. Sengoku was so angry that he tore open all the limited edition senbei collected by Garp on the table and poured them into his mouth in one breath. You are responsible for teaching first. Based on what you just said, this child only has domineering power but does not know how to use it. It is a waste of natural resources. I think so too. Even if he enters a stable period, his domineering spirit will still leak out involuntarily. Zifa nodded. Chapter 16 Uninvited Guests. There are obvious traces of training on him. Garp should have taught him a lot, but I don't need to correct him. Zifa started to analyze. Sengoku once again walked to the cabinet dedicated to Garp and took out a bag of out-of-print senbei hidden in the deepest part. While eating, he said. Then let's do this first. You teach him how to use hockey correctly. After that, I will send him to work under those 3 people. The corner of Zifa's mouth twitched, as if he had predicted the future 5 years later, when Garp raised his iron fist and chased Sengoku around the world. 1 day later, officer training camp. The sea breeze was gentle and fresh, with a slightly salty breath, blowing on Talag's sweaty face. The belly that was burning like fire was also blown away a lot by the cool sea breeze. Tyrage let out a long breath, jumped over the fainted sailor on the ground, and looked forward with firm eyes. Lap 872. As he expected, it seemed impossible to make him run until he fainted without bearing any weight. I raised my head and looked at the rising dawn in the distance. It should be around 5 o'clock now. In order to complete the mission goal quickly, Talag secretly took out his weight-bearing device in a hidden corner. At this time, this set of exclusive load-bearing equipment, which was made by Garp, had been increased by Talag to 5 tons. The moment he put the weight on his back, the familiar feeling of heaviness made Talag's eyes light up. He couldn't help but smile slightly and admired secretly. Sure enough, Dad still understands me. Uncle Zifa, is it okay? Shaking his head, the figure rushed out again, and the speed increased instead of decreasing compared to before. Genius already makes people despair, but what makes people even more desperate is that genius works harder than us. Ella, who was lying not far away, witnessed all the processes of carrying the weight on Talag's back. Ella gritted her teeth and struggled hard, trying to stand up again, but after 8 hours of vigorous running, his body had unilaterally rejected the instructions issued by his brain, and tears of reluctance streaked across his face. Ella couldn't help but roared. "Stand up for me." With this roar, Ella desperately squeezed her last potential. This talented sailor. With his strong perseverance, he got up from the ground again, with firm eyes, moved his steps limpingly, and chased the disappearing figure in front of him. "If you can still stand before I faint, I will recognize you." Tyridge, who was running extremely fast, always released his sense of knowledge to prevent him from trampling on a certain student while he was concentrating. This also made him aware of the scene of Ella struggling to get up behind him, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised, showing an appreciative smile. At the same time, 2 uninvited guests were welcomed at the door of the training camp. Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel looked at the 2 slowly approaching people in surprise, with a trace of cold sweat on his forehead. Seeing the 2 people getting closer and closer, the Flying Squirrel had no choice but to step out of the hiding place and stop in front of the 2 people. He asked in a somewhat stiff tone. "Sakaski, Kazan, what are you 2 doing here? Take turns to guard, no matter what, it won't be your turn." Akiji on the left has his hands behind his head, looking very relaxed. Pointing to Sakaski beside him, he said nonchalantly. "Ah la la, don't ask me. I came with him. As for what he wants to do, you ask him." The Flying Squirrel looked speechlessly at the gloomy Sakaski on the right, not understanding what this representative of the Hawks wanted to do when he came here. In the past, this guy Sakaski wished he could live on the sea so as to kill more pirates. "How can I have the time to care about this place, the cradle of Marine's growth, the officer training camp?" Sakaski on the right has many tattoos on his body. On his left arm is a sword, and from his chest to his elbow is a gorgeous rose and cherry blossom. At this time, he was wearing black sunglasses and holding a golden cigar in his mouth. He grinned and said calmly, "I want to be alone." Sakaski explained the purpose of his visit straightforwardly, and did not hold back at all because this was a confidential area. The Flying Squirrel frowned and said with some embarrassment, "Do you have a warrant from General Sengoku or Teacher Zifa? Regarding this person's request, if Fan Tao's power allows, Flying Squirrel can help, and he will definitely help. However, outsiders are not allowed to approach, which is a fatal order given by Kong Fleet Admiral himself. Flying Squirrel will never allow himself to neglect his duties." Sakaski shook his head. This time he came here on a temporary basis and did not ask for instructions from the Warring States period. "Then I'm extremely sorry, no one can go in without a warrant." The Flying Squirrel looked calm and decisively rejected Sakaski's request. Dark red magma dripped onto the ground, rising into bursts of gray smoke. Sakaski frowned, and the old anger that had been suppressed for a long time in his heart was somewhat uncontrollable. "Let me go in, and I will explain to the Warring States General later." The Flying Squirrel's right hand rested on the scabbard. Sakaski's state was a bit wrong. The person who came was not good. "Then please come back after you get the warrant. I won't stop you from doing anything you want to do." If possible, the Flying Squirrel is extremely reluctant to fight with this Hawk sect monster. For the sake of being in the same faction, the death will not happen. But it was very easy for Sakaski to injure or disable him. "Are you sure you want to stop me? Get out of my way. I only want one person, and this matter has nothing to do with you." Sakaski made the final announcement. The elementalization of his left arm was getting more and more serious and could break out at any time. "Ah la la, get out of the way, Flying Squirrel, you are no match for this guy. But Kazan, you don't know the importance of this place. If..." The Flying Squirrel looked at Sakaski, who was aside with a worried look. "If this guy started making trouble inside, the entire Marineland will be blown up to the sky by this place, the Combat Readiness Resource Storage Base. It's okay. I will keep an eye on him and won't let him mess around. You can report to the Warring States General. Regarding Kazan, who was explaining seriously, the corner of Flying Squirrel's mouth twitched slightly. He was afraid that it was the two of you who would fight inside. The long sword in his hand was sheathed, and the Flying Squirrel reluctantly stepped aside and let them in. I can't stop it anymore. The Flying Squirrel is not paying attention to the situation here. Instead, he rushed to the headquarters building very quickly so that he could report the matter to the Warring States General. Sakaski looked at the follower Kazan unhappily and snorted coldly. Humph. Mind your own business. Burning all the cigars in his hand, he opened the door of the training base and walked into it like an active volcano. The stimulation of language is neither painful or itchy for Akiji. As long as it is not a matter of principle, he usually muddles along and takes his time. Tylag is my younger brother. Akiji stopped where he was and looked at Akainu, who was walking into the training base in front of him. There was a hint of coldness in the corner of his mouth, and a long-lost silver light appeared in his lazy eyes. Chapter 17: The Ultimate Collision of Ice and Fire. It's almost the limit. Tylag, whose condition was unknown, continued to train with weights, and sweat and heat formed a layer of mist on his body. Green smoke came out of my dry throat. I calculated carefully that since arriving at the headquarters, let alone eating, it seems that I haven't even drank water. Is that person still standing? It's interesting, his consciousness has obviously disappeared. Talag steadily released his sense of knowledge, always paying attention to Ella, who had gray eyes behind him but was still moving forward slowly. Even if you fall down now, I still recognize you. You are not the coward I imagined. Tyrage recalled yesterday, when Ella took off the cloak of justice, and he admitted that he had made a mistake yesterday. System, come, have a Coke. System task settlement, reward, culinary grandmaster, excellent task process, and a box of Coca-Cola. The system used its last bit of stubbornness to protect its little remaining dignity. Some people are deficient in iron, some are deficient in calcium, but what I lack most is face. Tyrage didn't care what it thought, and took out a can of Coke from the space as if nothing had happened. The entire training ground had already been crowded with people, so he was not worried at all that his actions would be noticed. Z-La. Gudong gudong. It's great. But it would be better if it was iced. Pay attention next time. And during the short period of time that Tyrage was resting, a steady and powerful footsteps officially entered the training ground of the training camp. Huh? Why is he here? The moment Akainu set foot on the training ground, Tyrage spotted him and frowned. It seems that you are here for me, but it seems that we have never interacted before, right? The red dot in his consciousness was slowly approaching him, and he didn't know its purpose. Telyage didn't take it to heart and continued to perform his training mission. As his domineering energy entered a stable period, his physical strength increased by an unknown amount overnight. It is already extremely difficult to reach your limit simply by running. It seems it's time to start actual combat training. After that, physical training comes to an end. Tyrage didn't care about the dangerous aura that appeared within the sight range, and instead thought about future training plans. As for the reason why he could ignore Sakaski, it was just because another familiar aura appeared in the training camp. Ah la la, Sakaski, you have to look at him. This distance is enough. Akiji blocked Akainu's path and continued to approach Talaga without letting him go. With their powerful sense of sight, they can already travel across distances and clearly see the figures running in the distance from a distance. Sakaski completely ignored the conditions agreed by the two of them before, and his left arm became elemental again, and the raging magma was about to erupt at any time. People are different. Don't impose the mistakes that person made on him. Akiji seemed to be a different person. His expression was more serious than ever before, half of his body had turned into an ice sculpture, and he was ready to fight at all times. I would rather kill by mistake than let go. This world can no longer bear it, and a second voice of resistance appears. Being of the same blood as that person is the original sin. Get out of my way. Akainu, who was already overwhelmed by anger, roared and raised his left arm high, holding the magma, condensing it into a huge fireball. Violent pheasant mouth. Since the negotiation couldn't be settled, we had to do it. On Akiji's raised right hand, a huge ice bird formed from ice appeared. The meteor volcano, which is about to erupt at any time, faces off against the frozen pheasant mouth. The two sides refuse to give in to each other, one blue and one red, dividing the training ground into two heavens of ice and fire. Brother Kazan. The scene created by the two of them was too terrifying and huge, so how could it not attract Tyrich's attention? Ah la la, little Tai Lag, don't come here, it's very dangerous here. Akiji's impression of him still remains a few years ago, but he doesn't know that Tyrich has grown very well now. Although they couldn't defeat the two of them, they couldn't underestimate the attacks launched by Tyrich. Akiji and Akainu were afraid of each other and did not dare to take action, fearing to detonate this combat readiness base, but Tyrich had no such scruples at all. For Kazan and his father Garp, the relationship between father and son is more than the relationship between master and apprentice, and Tyrich, who values his family more than anything else. How could he stand by and watch his good brother being threatened by this red dog? If I remember correctly, this red dog killed my younger brother 17 years later and broke one of my eldest brother's legs. Dad seems to want to take his dog's head. Tyrich's mind was racing, and he thought a lot, and subconsciously threw the weight behind his back to the ground. His eyes gradually become dangerous, and he steps into the battlefield belonging to Akiji and Akainu. Akainu would never have thought that Tyrich, who was slowly approaching them, had the same idea as him. He would rather kill the wrong one than let him go. But Tyrich is even more ruthless. In order to nip the problem in the bud, he wants to eradicate it by cutting the grass and roots. While brother Kazan is here, he looks for an opportunity to kill him. Tyrich narrowed his eyes and looked up and down at Sakaski, who was holding the great fireball. Someone supported him and he said without any panic, "Brother Kazan, tell me what the consequences will be if we kill him together." The silent venue, the dull look in Kazan's eyes, and the question mark on Sakaski's face formed an unspeakable picture. "Kid! What did you say?" Akainu reacted and roared, completely irritated. The previous scruples no longer existed, and a magma fire fist struck Tyrag from a distance. "Ah la la, don't get excited, Sakaski. Two-thorn spear. Since you have already taken action, there is no need to worry about it until the fight is over." Two ice spears quickly formed beside Akiji and shot straight towards the magma arm that Akainu waved. Seeking death. Dark Hound. His attack was blocked by Akiji, and the love of the same period no longer existed. Akainu roared angrily, and quickly extended his lava-turned arm to hit Akiji, who was standing aside. Akainu's Dark Hound is not only powerful but also very fast. During the battle at the top, he used this skill to severely injure Whitebeard. Knowing his power, Akiji did not choose to resist forcefully, but chose to transform into his own elements, easily dodging the blow. The domineering Dark Hound passed through Akiji's chest without causing any harm. "As expected, I am still disgusted with your ideas." Akiji was also fired by this merciless blow. His body flashed with cold light and he jumped into the air. A cold light emitted from his outstretched hands, and Akiji shouted coldly, "Frozen! Time capsule!" Kazan's upper body was completely elementalized, releasing a long-distance freezing shock wave. Even the air was frozen wherever the shock wave passed. Guided by what he saw and heard, no matter how much Sakaski dodges, it is impossible to avoid Akiji's blow. Akiji didn't want to use this ability, just because he had used this ability to freeze his friend, former Marine Headquarters Lieutenant General Soro. Dark Hound. Dodging was of no use, so Akainu decided to deal with it head-on, once again releasing the fiery Dark Hound to face the incoming frozen capsules. The moment the two sides collided, a huge shock wave was generated, and rising water vapor covered the entire training ground. Gradually, the Dark Hound fell to the leeward, and was slowly frozen from the front end. The ice extended along the Dark Hound towards Akainu's body. Chance. Tyrich, who was always paying attention, his eyes flashed. He had not given up on this battle, but had been waiting for an opportunity. At this time, as expected, he waited. Chapter 18: The Obscene Light That Comes to the Rescue. Headquarters, conference room. Did we start a fight? It's so scary. Porcellino, wearing a yellow and white striped suit, was sitting leisurely on a chair, crossing his legs and clipping his nails. Flying Squirrel had reported to Sengoku a few minutes ago that Akainu and Akiji had forced their way into the base. These two bastards. They are simply lawless. Warring States slapped the table angrily and stood up. The plaque, "Justice that rules the world," hanging behind him shook and almost fell down. Porcellino, you are the fastest, you go and stop them first, I will be there soon. Porcellino curled his lips, stood up reluctantly, and said in a lewd tone. Those two people are as strong as monsters, so scary. Go quickly. Warring States roared, Conqueror's domineering energy spread out, impacting everything around him, and the plaque behind him completely fell down. Mr. Warring States period is even more terrifying. His body was hit hard by Conquerors, and Kizaru didn't even take his hat, but turned into a beam of light and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Warring State sighed, bent down to pick up the plaque on the ground, and gently wiped the dust on the 7 characters. Sengoku had already begun to get used to Kizaru's casualness. He didn't know how Kizaru, currently the most powerful among the 3, could have such a bad character. Sakazuki, Porcellino, Kazan. Because of the appearance of these 3 monsters, Marine's combat power has now reached its peak in the past century. It is the critical moment to show off your talents, but there are many internal factions. Akiji and Akainu often fight due to differences in their ideals. Kizaru lives his own messy 9-to-5 life. Behind the scenes of Zifa's retirement, Garp's free will, Fleet Admiral's election as Commander-in-Chief of the Army. Due to various reasons, Sora's powerful combat power was nowhere to be used, and all the pressure was placed on the conscientious Warring States. What is Zifa doing? Why don't you stop them? Warring States cursed secretly, flashed his figure, and rushed towards the back of the headquarters. Officer Training Camp. Akiji is more than 6 years younger than Akainu, which also means that they are not yet at the peak of their lives. There is a very clear comparison of combat power. Kizaru is better than Akainu, and Akainu is more than 1 step higher than Akiji. The frozen time capsule is very powerful. If Akainu hadn't been worried about accidentally igniting the combat readiness base, he could have used more powerful skills to block it. But it was precisely because of his scruples that he was briefly frozen by Akiji's blow. Good opportunity. Tyrich's eyes lit up, he officially entered the battlefield, jumped up from the ground. A moment of explosive power caused the stone floor beneath his feet to explode, and a figure appeared in the sky above Akainu, which was temporarily frozen. As the armed domineering energy slowly gathered on his right arm, Tyrich's previously dark arm gradually turned into dark purple. Sounds exploded around the clenched fists, and dark purple lightning ravaged Zhou Shen. Veins popped up on Tyrich's forehead, and he struck with all his strength, crashing down and roaring. Armed Moonfall Impact. The dark purple destructive shock wave volleyed towards the ice sculpture Akainu below. This scene stunned Akiji, who was just taking a breath in the other direction. Stop. Little Tyra. No. 2 voices came, one was Kizaru, who was rushing over at great speed, and the other was Akiji, who was too late to stop him. Mr. Garp's son? It's really scary. Kizaru was fully confident in his speed, and even when flying at extremely high speeds, he still had time to complain. He placed his hands in front of his abdomen, making a circle shape, and said with a grin. Yada mirror. After the obscene voice, a mirror-like light appeared in Kizaru's hand. The extremely fast reflected light beam formed a light track in the sky. Kizaru's figure disappeared in the blink of an eye, and when he reappeared, he was already standing in front of Akainu. It's so strange. A newcomer is as strong as a monster. Faced with the shock wave of a falling moon that was less than half the size of a training ground, Kizaru's expression remained unchanged, and he slowly stretched out his hands upwards, releasing an aura invisible to outsiders. Damn it! Still not in time? Tyrich noticed Kizaru's movements, but still gritted his teeth and punched him hard. He had already become a villain, so why not fight to the end? Wherever the dark purple shock wave passed, cracks seemed to appear in the space, and in an instant it collided with Kizaru, who had a calm expression. Boom! 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 Collisions followed one after another, and roars were endless. How can it be repaired? Tyrage continued to exert force, but, between the shock wave and Kizaru's hands, it's as if a wall of air has appeared, invisible and intangible. No matter how hard he tried, the shock wave could never break through his defense line. Even the airflow accompanying the impact was blocked by the wall of air. The bad news continued to come, the collisions continued here, and the ice behind Kizaru also made a muffled, click, sound. The ice shattered on the ground, and Akainu broke free from Akiji's shackles with his powerful weapon. Twisting his stiff neck, Sakazuki looked up at the sky with a gloomy face, and his arms became elemental again. Walking to Kizaru, he gave him a look of thanks and gritted his teeth and said, "Palyasalino, you block him first, I will go up and kill him." Now that the person has been rescued, even though the rescue target is wrong, Kizaru will not do anything other than the mission. "I refuse. You can deal with the remaining mess by yourself. If the little monster keeps trying harder, my life will be gone. It's so scary." Kizaru curled his lips slightly, and as he spoke, the figure turned into an element and appeared outside the range of Tyrage's shock wave. Without his obstruction, the impact of the falling moon came down in an instant. Akainu glared fiercely, and Kizaru, who was watching the show in the distance, roared, "Kid, I must kill you today. Come if you dare. What's the dog's name?" Tyrage snorted coldly and swung his fist again, hitting it hard. Moonfall impact. A biting dog does not bark. Akainu did not respond to him and shouted angrily, "Big fire!" Akainu's arms turned into huge lava fists made of lava, and he punched upwards with the impact of a volcanic eruption. "Ah la la, that's too much, Sakazuki." When Tyrage started to attack, Akiji had already stopped attacking and stood aside to watch the show. Until Akainu lost his mind and used a fire breath that was enough to destroy the entire training ground. Akiji had a gloomy face, his whole body became elemental, and he pressed his hands gently on the ground, as if embracing the whole world. Ice Age. Akiji's unreserved blow was enough to turn the sea between several islands into frozen land in an instant, freezing for up to a week. But this time, he did not intend to change the terrain, but aimed the blow at Akainu's body. When Akainu uses the big fire breath to kill Talig, he himself will be completely frozen by Akiji, and he will never be able to escape. The three people who used real fire no longer cared about where they were, and each used their full strength. The sky was gloomy, as if it was going to rain at any time. Dark clouds gradually formed whirlpools in the distant sky. Aimed below the vortex is the officer training base. 3 auras of destruction have echoed here for a long time: dark purple, fiery red, sea blue. Chapter 19 Justice. Stop it, me. Zifa, when do you want to watch the show? The three parties were about to collide, and the Warring States General arrived belatedly and roared, "Big Buddha! Guardian statue!" Warring States appeared in the middle of the battlefield, transformed into a huge golden Buddha statue, with his hands clasped together. A shadow of a Buddha statue appeared behind him. The Buddha's shadow was hundreds of meters high. As Warring States slowly stretched out his arms, a golden energy shield enveloped the three Tyrags, interrupting their attacks. After the blow, Warring States was sweating like rain, and his physical strength was severely exhausted, so he automatically released the giant Buddha form. "You really want to die, don't take the headquarters with you. There are at least hundreds of tons of gunpowder here. Do you want to raise the headquarters to the ground? Zifa! Get out of here, lousy!" The roar of the Warring States period resounded through the sky, and he glared at the marine pillars in front of him, wishing to kill them. "I have sense. But he must die. Akainu has a strong head and knows what he is sure about. Even if the Warring States period comes, he will not give in." His arms that are gradually turning into lava are aimed at the smiling Talig on the other side. "Who are you with, old man? Keep me in custody. Your qualification as a candidate for general is cancelled." Sengoku looked at Akainu and said angrily, waved his hand, and signaled the flying squirrel who came with the team to temporarily detain Akainu. "Humph, I can leave on my own." Akainu frowned and snorted coldly. He waved his cloak and followed the team to the criminal detention room without any trouble. Now that it's over, Sengoku turned and looked to the side, where Akiji and Terug were chatting and laughing. He stretched out his fingers and frowned. "And you? What's wrong with me?" Talaj moved a step to the right, avoiding Kai Zhanggua's stretched out finger, and said with a sneer. "He wants to kill me. I call this self-defense and counterattack." Warring States choked and swallowed the scolding in his mouth. At present, he still doesn't know what happened specifically, so he really can't blame Tairaj. He shook his head helplessly and sighed. "Go down, I will give you an explanation on this matter. Akiji, you and Kizaru come to my office." Giving the final order without any doubt, Warring States looked solemnly at the figure on the balcony on the third floor of the Iron Blood building, and said secretly, "Zifa, you must give me an explanation for this matter." He was clearly here, but he didn't take action in advance to stop this war, which could endanger the entire Malinfando. What on earth was he thinking? Warring States and several key personnel left, leaving behind a group of medical staff to see if any students were affected by the battle so that they could be treated in time. But no one who can come here for training is a fool. From the moment Akainu and Akiji faced each other in the air, they had already slipped away and ran to a faraway place, gathering together and watching lively. "Are there any wounded?" "There is indeed one." That was Ella, who was unconscious and still moving. He did not leave the battlefield immediately. Being swept away by the aftermath of the battlefield, he suffered 7 broken ribs, bone fractures in his thighs, and a slight concussion. "It's a waste of effort, if only I were stronger." He found a random step and sat down on it. After training for so long and having a fight, his physical strength was already exhausted. A feeling of fatigue swept through his body. As long as he closed his eyes now, Talaj dared to say that he would fall asleep within 3 seconds. Boom! 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 The sound of heavy footsteps came from far to near. Tylag turned around in confusion, saw the figure of the visitor, and smiled slightly. "Why did you kill Sakaski?" The person who came was none other than Zifa, whose arms were still intact. At this time, he had his hands behind his back and frowned, telling that he was not at peace in his heart. Talaj supported the wall, stood up with difficulty, and pretended to be ignorant and confused. "I didn't want to kill him." It began to rain lightly in the sky, and the raindrops washed away the battlefield ahead. Zifa, wearing sunglasses, stood behind Tairaj, speechless for a long time. After a long time, Zifa sighed and asked, "What do you believe in?" Zifa looked up at the sky. It was so cloudy that he couldn't see anything clearly. It was as bad as his mood at this time. Hearing this, Tairaj was stunned and sat down on the ground. He really didn't have the strength to stand. Looking at the sky, he smiled and said, "Faith? Who knows? If you really want to say it, does protecting count?" Zifa took off his sunglasses, sat next to Terug, and repeated foolishly, "Protect." He did not stop today's battle because he wanted to see clearly the beliefs of several people, including Tairaj, which was very important to Marine's future. The masterpiece of educational failure, Sakaski, he inherited Zifa's ruthlessness and loyalty, confirming that he is thoroughly righteous. Kuzan, once regarded as the most perfect masterpiece by Zifa, inherited Zifa's unruliness and persistence, confirming that he was lazy justice. The masterpiece of the uneducable, Porcelino, confirms his ambiguous justice. As the chief instructor of Marine, Zifa has the obligation to confirm what kind of person Marine will be leading in the next few decades. But today, in this fight without regard for human feelings, all he saw was disappointment and worry about the future. Zifa looked at the dark clouds that were gradually dispersing and thought to himself. Because Sakaski and Kazan have different ideas, sooner or later an irreconcilable conflict will break out due to a certain incident. Porcelino has a casual personality, has no beliefs of his own, and is not very impressive. Where is the future of Marine? After the rain, the sky cleared up, and the sky was like a wash. The sunlight penetrated the clouds and cast a golden color, which reflected on the face of Tyrage, who fell asleep against the wall. Zifa took off the cloak behind him and put it on Talag's body. He shook his head and headed to the headquarters building alone with countless sorrows. Guardian? Is it to protect the world? Peace? Will? Justice? Marine? Principle? Or what? Zifa was puzzled. While he was still young, let time explain everything. Tyrage snoring gradually began, and the half-elderly figure who was retreating had all his thoughts wrong. Protecting the world? He didn't have such a lofty ideal. The protection he mentioned was just to protect his family. He could do other things as easily as he could. Chapter 20. The biggest and best is reserved for you. Warring States stood on the ladder and hung the plaque indicating his determination back to its original position. After jumping down, he nodded with satisfaction at his masterpiece, looked helplessly at his old friend and said, "Although your starting point is right, this is not the reason for them to fight at the combat readiness base." Zifa held 4 documents tightly in his hands. It's the biographies of the 3 Akijis, plus Telage's ability evaluation file. The seemingly powerful Marine is actually like a barrel of explosives. With just a small fuse, an unpredictable explosion may occur. Combat preparation supplies, I had already transferred them before Tyrage came here. Warring States gritted his teeth, stepped forward and grabbed Zifa's collar, glared at him and said, "Then you should tell me. When they fought, I almost scared me to death." "Definitely next time." Zifa looked serious at Kaido. "There will be a next time." Sengua's voice broke a little. They have become accustomed to daily fighting and fighting since childhood. Warring States coughed and returned to his serious state. "Is it as serious as you say? I'm still young. It won't be a problem to persist for decades. It's too early to talk about the future now." Zifa looked up speechlessly at the plaque, "Justice that rules the world." He couldn't figure out why the Warring States period, which focused on the overall situation, had such short-sightedness. Looking back and forth with his old friend's strange eyes, Sengoku couldn't help but blush. He just thought that he was still just a general. Marine's future? Now was not the time for him to worry about it. "Stop talking about this, the garden party is coming." Warring States sighed and spoke dully. When Zifa heard this, his expression changed. He kicked the chair next to him, gritted his teeth and said, "These damn scum." "Shoo." Warring States covered Zifa's mouth, pointed to the phone bugs next to him, and said in his ear, "Be careful, the walls have ears. Akainu and several people will be dispatched from above to protect this garden party." Zifa's eyes were lonely. Those damn guys couldn't enjoy themselves up there, so why did they come down there every year? Aren't there a lot of pirates? Come with a big pirate and crush them all. I promise not to hunt you down. Zifa was still angry, so he turned around angrily and left, leaving Warring States alone, who could not help but sigh. That's right. Let Tyrage follow. He needs to see clearly. The nature of this world, the confusion in his eyes, I can see it. Zifa walked to the door, paused, and made a request. He has a pair of eyes that can see through people's hearts. In just a few interactions with him, he had already seen Talag thoroughly. His narrow vision needs to be expanded, and his small-minded capacity needs to be tempered. This will be of great benefit to his growth. If you do this, Garp will not forgive you. Warring States frowned and persuaded. Zifa walked forward with a firm expression and said, "Kaido, I will bear all the consequences myself. This trip of Tianlong people is a good place to hone one's mind. He can make people see clearly the greatest evil in the world, thus establishing their faith. It allows people to experience the most luxurious life in the world and temper their will. It can help people face the greatest injustice in the world and clarify their direction. Garp, because I am your son, I chose the most extreme method." Zifa bowed his head thoughtfully and walked forward, whispering to himself. I can't see his position. It's either good or evil. After this time, everything will be clear. One day later. After Sakaski was punished, the Warring States period sent a report, and the fleet admiral approved the note, officially canceling his qualification as a general candidate. Sengoku, who knew the whole story, concealed Tairage's ruthless attack alone. He didn't want to just pack his bags and go home as he had just joined the army. This was also a way to take care of Garp's son. Tai. Rookie number 1, you will be my idol from now on. Ella was lying on the hospital bed, her body covered with bandages, and tears of regret flowed down her face. He has watched the video secretly recorded by his classmates more than 100 times, and he regrets how he fainted at that time. Ella, who missed watching the peak match live, started crying and regretting it as soon as she heard about it after waking up. Talich peeled the apple in his hand and smiled. Take good care of your wound. If you cry, the wound will become infected in a short while. Ella looked at Talag with grateful eyes, secretly sighing at his carefulness and knowing how to peel an apple for herself. Crack. Ella's stretched out hand was frozen in midair. It had been working for a long time. Wasn't it for him? So sweet. Talag was in a happy mood, placed 2 apples on the table, and carried the fruit basket to the next room. He only had a few thousand bellies sneaked in from Maginot's house in his pocket, so how could he have any spare money to give each of them a fruit basket? Boom. Enter. After receiving permission, Talich pushed open the door of the ward and walked in. Cough cough cough. The first time he entered, Tairage was choked with tears. The smoke-filled room was filled with fairy spirit. Talich covered his mouth and nose, and a good ward was transformed into a sauna room. What are you here for? Smoker, with a cast on his head, his eyes glowing red, and the piles of cigars on the ground, told of his inner peace that he had not been able to calm down for a long time since he was injured. Ahem. Talich wiped the tears he had coughed up, quickly walked to the window and pushed it open, which made him feel much better. Old smoker. Are you going to die from smoking? Talich never imagined that he would be controlled by a familiar stranger using a low-quality tobacco for 5 minutes. This is Lousy's room, I can do whatever I want. You have no control over it. Smoker held on to the cast that was about to burst and cursed back. Who are you with Lousy? A wicked smile appeared at the corner of Tairage's mouth, his figure flashed, and when Smoker didn't respond, he quickly approached. He picked up a box of cigars on the bed table, threw 2 bananas on the bed casually, and ran out in a dashing manner. Nothing else. I just came to see my comrades. Give me the cigar. Smoker jumped off the hospital bed and ran after him. The plaster on his head finally couldn't withstand Smoker's fierce struggle and broke into pieces with a click. Smoker fell to his knees with a painful wail. Ah. B********************************** D. I must kill you. The ward number 315 hanging on the door is Tina's recuperation room. She herself was not injured, but due to the backlash of the fruit's ability, her body was extremely weak. I have been resting for a night, but there is still no improvement. The doctor said that it will take at least 3 days before I can recover as before. When Tairage went in, Tina was still sleeping on the hospital bed. The doctor told her to sleep more to help her recover her strength. Really, how much money did that old smoker give you? He's not domineering and dares to fight me. Looking at Tina, who was pale on the bed, Talich shook his head and placed the fruit basket on her bedside. It's an advantage for you. I bought a total of 3 apples, 2 bananas, and 1 durian. The biggest and best ones must be reserved for women. Tairage stood in front of Tina's bed with a serious look and whispered. When he walked out of the room, he glanced at it with regret. He was not willing to eat the durian beside Tina's pillow. You are listening to it in Eugene Light Novels.